Hello friends. Welcome to the Ben 10 What Ifs. How are you all? So we are back with an interesting movie on what if Ben 10 became the hero of Nevermore. With evil Omnitrix and fell in love with Wednesday, Enid and Gwen. Also be sure to subscribe and like this video. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. The Corruption of Light. The sky fractured like stained glass above Bellwood. Reality itself splintering as the interdimensional entity tore through the fabric separating worlds. Emerald lightning forked between violet storm clouds as 17-year-old Ben Tennyson sprinted across cracked asphalt, the Omnitrix glowing an urgent green against his wrist. Wind howled through abandoned streets, carrying the acrid scent of ozone and something else. Something that shouldn't exist in this dimension. Grandpa, I've got eyes on it. Ben shouted into his communicator, voice steady despite the chaos surrounding him. Whatever this thing is, it's not like anything we've seen before. Max Tennyson's voice crackled through static. Ben, wait for backup. Readings are off the charts. This isn't. The transmission died as another reality tremor shook the ground. Above, the entity unfurled like living darkness, a mass of writhing shadows punctuated by eyes that seemed to observe from every angle simultaneously. It possessed no definable shape, existing as a violation of natural law rather than a creature bound by physical form. With each passing second, it drew more matter into itself, growing larger as buildings, vehicles, and even light itself disappeared into its mass. Ben's expression hardened as he assessed the situation. Civilians evacuated, perimeter established by plumber forces, but the entity was expanding exponentially. The calculations ran through his mind automatically. Rate of growth, estimated time until containment failure, civilian risk assessment. 3 minutes, maybe 4 before the situation became unmanageable. No time for backup. Going hero, he muttered, fingers already manipulating the Omnitrix's dial with practiced precision. The familiar aliens cycled past. Heat blast, 4 arms, XLR-8, before he settled NA form suited for interdimensional threats. Alien X should contain this. The hesitation lasted only a microsecond, a moment of recognition that Alien X required consensus between personalities often unwilling to act. Another calculation. Probability of persuading Serena and Bellicus quickly enough to matter. Too low. Clockwork, then, he decided, slamming his palm down on the device. Green. Light erupted around him, but instead of the expected transformation, the Omnitrix emitted a high-pitched whine unlike anything Ben had heard before. The familiar transformation energy stuttered, flashed, then surged with unexpected ferocity. Pain lanced through Ben's arm as the Omnitrix sparked violently. Something was wrong. The device had malfunctioned before, but this felt different, more fundamental. As if the very programming was being rewritten. Through the agony, Ben noticed the entity reacting, countless eyes swiveling toward him with sudden interest. No, Ben gritted through clenched teeth, fighting to maintain control as the Omnitrix's energy began to intermingle with tendrils of darkness reaching from the entity. The green glow darkened, threads of midnight blue and deep purple, corrupting its normally vibrant color. The entity descended, a hurricane of non-Euclidean angles and impossible geometry, drawing inexorably toward the Omnitrix. Ben backed away, but the tendrils stretched between them like an umbilical cord of shadow, impossible to break. Override code Alpha 1030/Ben. He shouted, trying emergency protocols Azimuth had installed. The Omnitrix merely pulsed darker, its surface now crawling with symbols that resembled no language Ben recognized. The entity's voice, if such a term could apply, manifested not as sound but as concept directly inserted into Ben's consciousness. Catalyst, vessel, gateway, asterisk. The world tilted sideways as reality began to tear around them. Ben fought to remain standing as gravitational forces pulled in contradictory directions. The Omnitrix now pulsed with darkness, green light visible only in brief flashes beneath the corruption. It felt wrong against his skin, cold where it should be neutral, heavy where it should be weightless. Whatever you're doing, stop. Ben commanded, voice steady despite the situation. He'd faced world-ending threats before, negotiated with beings of unimaginable power. Fear was a luxury he couldn't afford. Convergence inevitable, the entity condensed, its amorphous form contracting into a spiraling vortex centered on Ben's position. The pressure was immense, reality itself, seeming to fold inward as spacetime buckled under forces it was never designed to withstand. Ben made his decision in a fraction of a second. If the Omnitrix was the target, removing himself from the populated area took priority over attempting to fight. He plotted the fastest route to the abandoned quarry outside town limits, where collateral damage could be minimized. The first step never landed. Reality ruptured with a sound like the universe gasping, and Benjamin Tennyson vanished from Earth Prime, the corrupted Omnitrix acting as both compass and key to worlds beyond. Consciousness. SS returned in fragments, sensation before memory, pain before understanding. Cold stone pressed against Ben's cheek. Rain fell in misty curtains, each droplet uncomfortably heavy against his skin, as if gravity operated differently here. The air carried unfamiliar scents. Damp earth, ancient stone, and something else, something sweetly metallic, like copper pennies soaked in honey. Ben forced his eyes open, fighting waves of nausea as his vision struggled to focus. Above, a night sky darker than any he'd seen before, stars arranged in constellations he didn't recognize. The moon hung bloated and yellow, too large and too close. Wrong sky, he mumbled, pushing himself to his knees. Wrong everything. Memory rushed back. The entity, the corruption, the Omnitrix. His eyes snapped to his wrist, where the device still rested. But transformed beyond recognition. The familiar green hourglass symbol had inverted, now glowing a deep midnight blue bordering on black. The casing had darkened to gunmetal gray, with intricate patterns etched across its surface that seemed to shift when viewed peripherally. "What did you do to me?" Ben whispered, touching the device cautiously. It thrummed in response, the vibration sending uncomfortable shivers up his arm and into his chest. The sensation felt intrusive, as if something was testing the boundaries between technology and user. Taking stock of his surroundings, Ben realized he was in a graveyard, ancient and sprawling, with weathered headstones and mausoleums stretching into mist-shrouded darkness. Beyond the cemetery's wrought iron fence loomed a massive Gothic structure, its windows glowing amber against the night, towers and spires piercing the low-hanging clouds. A school, perhaps, or some kind of institution. Light spilled Rom too many windows for a private residence, and something about its architectural presence suggested education, albeit of an uncomfortably esoteric nature. The Omnitrix, or whatever it had become, pulsed suddenly, sending a jolt of cold energy up Ben's arm. The sensation was intimately wrong, like ice forming in his veins. Without warning, the device activated. Unlike the familiar flash of green transformation energy, darkness erupted from the device, enveloping Ben in shadows that moved with deliberate purpose. The sensation was nothing like his usual transformations. Where those felt like rapid reconstruction, this felt like invasion, something overriding his body rather than replacing it. His consciousness stretched, thinned, became diffuse as his physical form dissolved into shadow and mist. Panic flared. Was this death? Disintegration? But awareness remained, spreading outward as his body lost cohesion. Ben recognized the transformation with horrified familiarity. Ghost Freak, the ectonorite DNA sample that had once developed sentience and escaped the Omnitrix. But this was wrong. Where Ghost Freak had been ethereal but definite, this form existed as gradients of darkness, boundaries uncertain between self and environment. Instinctively, Ben attempted to reassert control, to consolidate his newly transformed state into something manageable. The effort felt like trying to gather smoke with bare hands. This wasn't just Ghost Freak, this was something the entity had twisted, corrupted into a shadow of its original function. Ghost Freak Umbra whispered something in the back of his mind. Not his thought, not exactly. A cold sensation of satisfaction that wasn't his own slithered through his consciousness. Yes, better. Get out of my head, Ben hissed, his voice distorted and layered with harmonic undertones that echoed through the cemetery. The sound disturbed nearby ravens, sending them flapping into the night with indignant caws. Concentration allowed him to stabilize somewhat, pulling his amorphous form into a roughly humanoid shape, taller than his human form, with elongated limbs that faded to wisps at the extremities. Where Ghost Freak had a single eye, This form featured a suggestion of facial features crafted from deeper shadows, with eyes that glowed the same midnight blue as the corrupted Omnitrix symbol that now manifested in the center of his chest. Movement caught his attention. A figure walking purposefully through the graveyard, unaware or unconcerned by the supernatural entity hovering among the tombstones. A girl, perhaps his age or slightly younger, dressed entirely in black with pale skin that seemed to absorb the moonlight rather than reflect it. Her dark hair was arranged in perfect braids, and she moved with mechanical precision between the graves. Ben instinctively faded deeper into shadow, uncertain of his appearance in this form or how a civilian might react. The girl paused, head tilting slightly as if listening to something beyond normal hearing range. Then, with deliberate slowness, she turned directly toward his hiding place. "I can sense your presence," she stated flatly, voice devoid of inflection yet somehow conveying absolute certainty. "You're disrupting the spiritual equilibrium of this cemetery. The dead are quite annoyed." Ben remained silent, assessing. This wasn't ordinary human behavior, no fear, no surprise at detecting something supernatural. Was she a threat, an opportunity for information? The tactical calculations came automatically. The girl sighed with theatrical exasperation. "I can see you perfectly well. Your attempt at concealment is about as effective as hiding an elephant under a doily." Something about her complete lack of fear decided him. Ben allowed his form to become more visible, hovering slightly above the ground. "Where am I?" he asked, the question emerging with that same unsettling harmonic distortion. The girl's expression didn't change, but one eyebrow arched fractionally higher. "Interesting. A non-corporeal entity with dimensional displacement markers. You're not from here." It wasn't a question. "No," Ben confirmed. "I was fighting something, an interdimensional entity. There was a malfunction with my transformation device, and I woke up here." "Transformation device," she repeated, eyes flicking to the symbol on his chest. "That would explain the fluctuating energy signature. You're not naturally spectral, then." Ben attempted to access the Omnitrix's transformation controls, searching for the familiar mental pathway to reversion. Nothing happened. The corrupted device seemed locked in this form, unresponsive to his commands. "I should be able to change back," he muttered, more to himself than to her. The girl approached with clinical interest, showing no fear as she circled his shadowy form. "Fascinating. You're at Nevermore Academy, by the way. The premier educational institution for supernatural and gifted youth." One suggested she was quoting a brochure she found particularly insipid. "I'm Wednesday Addams. You've managed to materialize in my favorite thinking spot." "Ben Tennyson," he replied automatically, then immediately questioned the wisdom of revealing his identity to a stranger in an unknown dimension. Wednesday's eyes narrowed fractionally. "Tennyson. That name appears in certain obscure interdimensional texts in the restricted section of our library." She studied him with renewed interest. "The bearer of many forms. Though the descriptions didn't mention this." Ben's attempt to respond was interrupted by a sudden, violent pulse from the Omnitrix symbol. Pain lanced through his ethereal form as darkness swirled more violently around him. He felt the entity, whatever fragment of it had corrupted the Omnitrix, pushing against his consciousness, attempting to seize control. "Something's wrong," he managed, voice distorting further as his form began to lose cohesion. "Can't maintain." Wednesday stepped back, reaching into her dress pocket to withdraw what appeared to be a small silver object, a charm or amulet of some kind. "Your energy pattern is destabilizing. The transformation appears to be rejecting your consciousness as the controlling influence." Ben fought against the darkness, trying to reassert dominance over the transformation. This had happened before with Ghost Freak, but never so quickly. Never with such overwhelming force. The entity wasn't just using the alien DNA, it was using it as a conduit, attempting to manifest through Ben himself. Wednesday watched he struggle with detached fascination before making a decision. She raised the silver amulet, which caught moonlight and refracted it in impossible angles. "This will hurt," she informed him matter-of-factly. Then began speaking in a language Ben didn't recognize, something ancient and guttural that seemed to resonate with the very air around them. Light erupted from the amulet, silver-white and painfully bright. It struck Ben's shadowy form like a physical blow, sending him reeling backward with a cry that echoed across multiple sonic frequencies simultaneously. The darkness writhed, Momentar. highly disrupted by whatever Wednesday had done. In that instant of disruption, Ben found the mental pathway he needed, seizing control long enough to access the transformation controls. With desperate focus, he commanded the device to revert to human form. The shadowy substance comprising his body contracted violently, darkness flowing back into the symbol on his chest. Pain followed, not the usual, seamless transition of transformation, but something that felt like being forced through a space too small to accommodate him. Reality twisted, bent, and suddenly Ben was human again, collapsing to his knees on wet grass. Gasping for breath, Wednesday observed with clinical interest. Impressive recovery. Most entities would have been banished by that incantation. Ben looked up at her, vision still swimming. I'm not an entity. He raised his wrist, showing the corrupted Omnitrix. This device lets me transform into different alien species. But something's wrong with it. It's been corrupted. Alien, Wednesday repeated, testing the word, extraterrestrial rather than extradimensional. Interesting distinction. She crouched beside him, studying the device with undisguised curiosity. The energy signature is unlike anything in our dimensional catalog. A technology that allows biological transformation into non-indigenous species. Her eyes met his. You realize the faculty will want to dissect you immediately. Ben couldn't tell if she was joking. Her expression remained perfectly neutral. I'd prefer to avoid dissection, he managed, pushing himself to his feet. The core, upted Omnitrix pulsed softly against his wrist, its glow now subdued but still wrong, that deep midnight blue where vibrant green should be. Wednesday considered him for a moment, head tilting mechanically as if processing new information. You're injured, she observed, pointing to his arm where a dark substance that wasn't quite blood seeped from beneath the Omnitrix, tracing veins that glowed faintly with the same blue light. Ben stared at the spreading corruption with growing concern. That's new. Fascinating, Wednesday murmured, watching the progression of blue-black veins up his arm. Some form of technological symbiosis. It appears your device is attempting to integrate more fully with your biological systems. Can you help me? Ben asked directly, assessing her as his best available option. She clearly possessed knowledge of the supernatural, had access to at least one powerful artifact, and seemed curiously unbothered by his presence. Wednesday straightened, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her black dress. Help is such an imprecise term. Can I prevent your immediate molecular dissolution? Possibly. Can I reverse whatever interdimensional corruption has compromised your device? Unknown. She turned toward the imposing Gothic structure beyond the cemetery. However, Nevermore Academy does possess certain resources that might prove useful in your situation. She began walking without waiting for his response, her pace measured and unhurried. Ben hesitated only briefly before following. The corrupted Omnitrix pulsed against his wrist, a constant reminder of his precarious situation. Whatever had happened during the battle, he was far from home with a malfunctioning device that seemed to be actively working against him. Wednesday led him through the cemetery toward a wrought iron gate set into stone pillars topped with stylized ravens. Beyond the gate, a path wound through immaculately maintained grounds toward the main building. Gothic architect, Ure stretched imposingly against the night sky, all pointed arches and flying buttresses, with gargoyles peering down from rain-slick rooftops. Nevermore Academy, Wednesday explained without being prompted, was founded in 1692 following the Salem difficulties. A sanctuary for the supernaturally gifted to develop their abilities without the inconvenience of pitchfork-wielding mobs. Her tone suggested she found the absence of mobs slightly disappointing. Ben took in the enormous structure, noting defense points, exit routes, and potential tactical advantages automatically. Years of harrowing had ingrained certain habits. What kind of supernatural gifts? Varied, Wednesday replied. Vampirism, lycanthropy, gorgonism, psychic abilities, necromancy, the full spectrum of genetic deviancy and mystical inheritance. I myself possess psychic abilities, primarily focused on receiving death-related visions. Extremely inconvenient during examinations, she delivered this information with such flat effect that Ben momentarily wondered if she was joking again. Her expression remained unreadable. As they approached the main building, Ben noticed movement behind windows, silhouettes of students engaged in activities impossible to discern at this distance. Music drifted from somewhere inside, discordantly beautiful, like an orchestra deliberately playing in clashing keys. The autumn ball preparations, Wednesday explained with evident distaste. A tedious social ritual involving formal attire and awkward proximity to sweating adolescents attempting primitive mating behaviors. Before Ben could respond, the massive front doors swung open, spilling warm light across the stone steps. A woman emerged, tall and elegant in a tailored suit of midnight blue, her dark skin contrasting. With silver-streaked hair pulled into an immaculate updo. She carried herself with authority, hands clasped behind her back as she surveyed the two teenagers approaching her domain. "Miss Adams," she addressed Wednesday. Voice refined and measured. "Curfew was 30 minutes ago. Your nighttime constitutional has exceeded its approved duration." Her gaze shifted to Ben, expression unchanging but somehow conveying intense scrutiny. "And you've brought a visitor. How unprecedented." Wednesday didn't appear concerned by the woman's tone. "Headmaster Weems, this is Benjamin Tennyson. Interdom, ancient traveler with a corrupted transformation device currently threatening to dissolve his molecular structure. I thought it might be inconsiderate to let him die in our cemetery without at least offering assistance." Headmaster Weems regarded Ben with new interest, eyes lingering on the corrupted Omnitrix. "Indeed, how thoughtful of you, Wednesday." She stepped aside, gesturing toward the open doors. "Mr. Tennyson, perhaps you'd be more comfortable continuing this conversation inside. Our infirmary has certain specialized equipment for handling interdimensional anomalies." The casual NTION of interdimensional travel suggested this wasn't entirely unusual at Nevermore. Ben weighed his options quickly. His arm was becoming increasingly numb where the corruption spread, and the Omnitrix continued to pulse with unsettling rhythm. Without access to azimuth or plumber technology, these people represented his best chance at understanding what had happened. "Thank you," he said with careful formality, mounting the steps. Inside, the Academy's Gothic exterior gave way to equally Gothic interior design. Vaulted ceilings, stained glass windows depicting what appeared to be historical scenes of supernatural significance. And wood-paneled hallways lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow visitors with too much awareness. Students hurried past, many stopping to stare at the newcomer. Ben cataloged details automatically. A boy with scaled skin and vertical pupils, twin girls who flickered occasionally into transparency, a tall, lanky student whose shadow moved independently of its owner. "Our student body represents over 50 distinct supernatural classifications," Headmaster Weems explained, noting his observations. "Nevermore prides itself on accommodating all manifestations of the paranormal, arcane, and biologically divergent." She led them through corridors that seemed to bend at subtly wrong angles, eventually arriving at a heavy wooden door marked simply, "Infirmary." Unlike the medieval aesthetic of the main building, the room beyond was surprisingly modern, gleaming equipment of both scientific and arcane nature, holographic displays showing vital signs and mystical energy readings, and walls lined with containers holding substances that defied easy categorization. A woman in a white coat looked up from a workstation, her features sharp and bird-like. Eyes magnified behind thick glasses. "Headmaster, another dimensional incident. Dr. Kinbote, our new arrival appears to be experiencing complications from a corrupted transformation device," Weems explained. "Would you be so kind as to perform a preliminary assessment?" Dr. Kinbote's eyes lit with academic interest as she approached Ben, gaze immediately fixing on the Omnitrix. "Extraordinary. Biomechanical integration at the cellular level." She reached for his arm without asking permission, fingers hovering just above the device. "May I?" Ben hesitated before extending his arm. "It's called the Omnitrix. It allows me to transform into different alien species by accessing their DNA. But something happened during a fight with an interdimensional entity. It's been corrupted." Dr. Kinbote guided him to an examination table surrounded by equipment that hummed with both electrical and magical energy. Screens flickered to life around them, displaying readings in systems of measurement Ben didn't recognize. "Fascinating," she murmured, manipulating controls that caused beams of multicolored light to scan across the Omnitrix. "The device appears to have been compromised at the fundamental level. Whatever entity you encountered has imprinted a portion of its essence into the transformation matrix." On nearby screens, images appeared of the Omnitrix's internal structure, impossibly complex, with layers of technology beyond even what Ben had glimpsed during previous malfunctions. But throughout the familiar architecture, threads of darkness wound like parasitic vines, pulsing in time with the device's glow. Can you fix it? Ben asked directly. Doctor. Kinbote adjusted her glasses, frowning at the readings. Fix implies a comprehensive understanding of its original state. Without baseline readings, I can only address symptoms rather than underlying cause. She turned to a cabinet, withdrawing a vial of iridescent liquid. This will temporarily suppress the corruption's progression through your biological systems. Beyond that, research will be necessary. She applied the substance to the veins spreading from the Omnitrix. The effect was immediate, a cooling sensation as the blue-black discoloration receded slightly, the device's pulsing glow stabilizing to a steady illumination. The corruption appears to feed on negative emotional states, drive. Kinbote observed, studying the readings. Your fear, anger, frustration, all provide energetic sustenance that strengthens its hold. Fascinating symbiotic mechanism. That tracks with what I experienced during transformation, Ben confirmed. It felt like something was pushing for control, using my own emotions to gain leverage. Headmaster Weems, who had been observing silently, stepped forward. It seems we have something of a situation, Mr. Tennyson. You are clearly not from our dimension, possess technology of extraordinary power, and are currently experiencing a condition that could prove dangerous to yourself and others. She clasped her hands before her. Protocol dictates notification to the Supernatural Security Council. However, she paused, studying Ben with shrewd assessment. Exceptions can be made for those with educational potential. Nevermore Academy has a long tradition of offering sanctuary to unique individuals requiring specialized accommodation. Ben understood the implicit offer. You're suggesting I stay here. As a student, temporarily, Weems clarified, while we research your condition and explore options for interdimensional travel. Nevermore possesses resources uniquely suited to your situation, including faculty with expertise in dimensional theory and containment protocols for powerful artifacts. Wednesday, who had been examining the medical readouts with quiet intensity, spoke without looking up, the alternative being council custody, which typically involves extensive examination of unusual specimens. Their research methods are thorough. The threat wasn't subtle, but Ben had faced worse intimidation tactics from beings far more physically imposing than Headmaster Weems. Still, antagonizing the only people who seemed willing to help would be strategically unsound. I appreciate the offer, he said carefully. But I need to find a way back to my dimension. There's an entity there that needs to be stopped. Interdimensional travel requires precise coordinates and substantial energy, Weems replied. Neither of which we currently possess. Research will be necessary before any attempt can be made. She smiled thinly. In the meantime, Nevermore can provide accommodation, resources, and protection from certain interested parties who would find your unique abilities compelling. Ben recognized negotiation when he heard it. Weems wanted something. Access to the Omnitrix, perhaps, or information about his dimension. But she was also offering genuine assistance, at least for now. All right, he conceded. Temporary enrollment while we figure this out. Weems nodded, satisfied. Excellent. Doctor. Kinbote will complete your examination and provide appropriate suppressants for the corruption. Wednesday will show you to our special accommodations dormitory. She turned to leave, then paused. Welcome to Nevermore Academy, Mr. Tennyson. I suspect your time with us will be most educational. After she departed, drive. Kinbote continued her examination, applying additional suppressant to the affected area and providing a small vial of the substance. Apply this every 12 hours. It will slow the corruption's progression but cannot halt it entirely. Avoid extreme emotional states. They accelerate the integration process. When the examination concluded, Wednesday led Ben through more twisting corridors, deeper into the Academy's labyrinthine structure. Other students they passed stared openly, whispering behind hands or sometimes not bothering to whisper at all. Your arrival is already generating substantial gossip, Wednesday observed tonelessly. Interdimensional travelers are uncommon even at Nevermore. The last one arrived in 1986 and promptly dissolved into constituent atoms when attempting to use the gymnasium shower. That's not reassuring, Ben replied, unconsciously touching the corrupted Omnitrix. It wasn't intended to be reassuring, Wednesday stated. Merely informative. Your biological stability appears superior to his. For now. They descended a spiral staircase into what appeared to be a converted tower section separated from the main dormitories. Wednesday stopped before a heavy oak door reinforced with metal bands inscribed with symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. The containment dormitory, she explained. For students whose abilities require specialized security measures. The wards prevent unauthorized exit or entry and suppress certain metaphysical emanations. I'm being contained? Ben asked, voice hardening slightly. Wednesday regarded him impassively. Everyone at Nevermore is being contained, to some degree. The difference is merely in methodology. She gestured to the door. This room has held vampires during bloodlust phases, werewolves during lunar transitions, and a particularly troublesome astral projector who kept possessing the kitchen staff. The wards should help stabilize your device's energy fluctuations. She placed her palm against a panel beside the door, which illuminated briefly before the heavy door swung open. Inside was surprisingly comfortable, a spacious room with Gothic furnishings that somehow managed to appear both antique and functional. A four-poster bed dominated one wall, while bookshelves lined another. A desk, wardrobe, and sitting area completed the space, illuminated by what appeared to be enchanted lanterns that cast warm, steady light. Accommodations include basic necessities and emergency containment protocols, Wednesday continued. The bathroom features specialized plumbing for non-standard physiologies. The mirror can be covered for those with reflection-related complications. The bed adjusts for variable body mass during transformations. Ben entered cautiously, noting that despite its comfortable appearance, the room featured subtle security measures. The window overlooking the grounds was barred with what appeared to be silver and iron, and symbols similar to those on the D were inscribed around potential exit points. So I'm a prisoner, he concluded. We're all prisoners of circumstance, Mr. Tennyson, Wednesday replied philosophically. Yours simply has more tangible bars. She reached into her pocket, withdrawing a small device resembling an antique pocket watch. Communication talisman. For emergencies or if you require assistance navigating Nevermore's social hierarchy. I've been assigned as your student liaison, which I find as unpleasant as you likely will. Ben accepted the device, surprised by its weight. Why are you helping me? Wednesday's expression remained unchanged, but something flickered briefly in her eyes. Curiosity, perhaps. 3 reasons. First, Headmaster Weems instructed me to, and while I find authority fundamentally suspect, selective compliance facilitates my own research. Second, your interdimensional arrival corresponds with certain prophecies I've been investigating regarding the Nevermore convergence. Third, she paused, considering, I find your corruption scientifically interesting. Ben wasn't sure whether to be offended or amused by her frank assessment. Before he could respond, the corrupted Omnitrix pulsed sharply, sending a lance of pain up his arm. The momentary discomfort must have shown on his face. The suppression agent requires time to fully integrate, Wednesday observed. Rest is advisable. Classes begin at 8. Breakfast is served from 6:30, though I recommend avoiding the kitchen's attempts at normal food. Their understanding of human dietary requirements is theoretical at best. She turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. One final warning, Benjamin Tennyson. Nevermore protects its own, but it also protects itself. Whatever brought you here, whatever corrupted your device, has established a connection to our dimension that certain parties will find deeply concerning. Trust selectively. With that cryptic statement, she departed, the heavy door swinging shut behind her with a resonant thud. Ben heard multiple locks engaging automatically, physical and otherwise. Alone in the unfamiliar room, Ben sank onto the edge of the bed, examining the corrupted Omnitrix more carefully. The midnight blue glow cast eerie shadows across the ancient stones, while the strange symbols etched across its surface seemed to shift subtly when viewed from different angles. Quote, Asmith would have a fit if he saw you now, Ben muttered to the device. In response, the Omnitrix pulsed once, the symbol briefly displaying what looked like a face composed of darkness before returning to its corrupted state. Exhaustion suddenly overwhelmed him. The dimensional transfer, the transformation, the corruption spread, all had taken their toll. Despite his training to remain alert in unfamiliar surroundings, Ben found his eyelids growing heavy. He managed to kick off his shoes before collapsing fully onto the bed, darkness claiming his consciousness almost immediately. Dreams came, but they weren't his own. Ben floated in an endless void, surrounded by fragments of shattered reality, pieces of dimensions broken and discarded like unwanted toys. In the distance, something massive moved between the fragments, occasionally plucking one to examine before crushing it to cosmic dust. Vessel. The entity's voice resonated through his consciousness, no longer inserted from outside but emerging from within. As if it had always been there, waiting to be acknowledged. You bear the key. Ben tried to speak, to demand answers, but here in this dream realm between dimensions, he had no voice of his own. He could only listen as the entity continued its one-sided conversation. Many forms but one purpose. Images flashed through the dreamscape, the Omnitrix, but not as Ben knew it. Older, somehow, newer, paradoxically, its creation and destruction happening simultaneously across countless timelines, dimensions, realities. Always the same purpose, preservation of life, but interpreted through infinite variations. The convergence approaches. The void shifted, reality reassembling to show Nevermore Academy, but viewed from impossible angles. Ben saw Wednesday walking purposefully through hidden passages beneath the school, consulting ancient texts whose pages turned themselves. He saw Headmaster Weems in a chamber filled with artifacts of impossible power, acting urgently with figures whose faces remained in shadow. He saw other students, a werewolf girl with pink-streaked hair practicing complex transformations in a moonlit clearing, a pale, elegant vamp. Directing ravens with subtle hand gestures, others whose nature he couldn't determine, all moving like pieces on some vast cosmic chessboard. Your function is clear. The dreamscape contracted suddenly, focusing on the corrupted Omnitrix. Within its mechanism, darkness pulsed like a heartbeat, growing stronger with each cycle. The corruption wasn't just affecting the device, it was transforming it. Repurposing it for something beyond its original function. The Noctrix awakens. The device on his dream self's wrist expanded, tendrils of shadow extending to envelop his entire arm, then his body. But unlike the Ghost Freak Umbra transformation, this felt natural, right, as if the darkness had always been part of him, merely waiting for the proper catalyst to emerge. You will serve. Ben fought against the spreading darkness, struggling to reassert his identity against the entity's influence. This was still a dream, his dream, and he refused to surrender control even in this intangible realm. I serve no one, he managed, finding his voice at last. The entity's presence contracted, focusing its attention more directly on Ben's resistance. The pressure was immense, reality itself, bending under the force of its concentration. Resistance is evolution. Confusion momentarily disrupted Ben's defiance. The entity didn't seem angered by his refusal. If anything, it seemed pleased. The darkness receded slightly, allowing Ben more autonomy within the dreamscape. Stronger vessel. Images flashed again. Ben wielding the corrupted Omnitrix, now called Noctrix, against threats that dwarfed anything he'd faced before. Transformations into shadowed versions of familiar aliens, each more powerful than their original forms but twisted, darker in both appearance and function. T-Blast became living black flame that consumed light itself. 4 arms transformed into a towering behemoth of shadow and strength. XLR-8 evolved into something that moved between moments rather than merely through space. The power you seek. The temptation was subtle but powerful. These forms could accomplish more, protect more effectively, defeat threats beyond what his current capabilities allowed. The corruption wasn't destruction but evolution, the entity insisted without words. Improvement. Advancement. At what cost? Ben demanded, refusing to be seduced by promises of power. The N.T.'s response came not in words but in a final vision, the dimensional barriers between worlds collapsing, reality itself unraveling as something vast and incomprehensible emerged from the void between universes. The convergence, whatever that meant, bringing about the end of everything Ben had ever known or cared about. And himself, wielding the fully evolved Noctrix, standing as the last defense against cosmic annihilation. Choice as illusion. The dreamscape began to fragment, the connection weakening as Ben's consciousness drifted toward wakefulness. The entity's final message echoed as reality reasserted itself. We will speak again, bearer of the Noctrix. Ben jolted awake, sweat-soaked and disoriented. Sunlight streamed through the barred window, casting long shadows across the stone floor of his containment room. For a moment, he struggled to separate dream from reality, the entity's presence still lingering at the edges of his consciousness. The corrupted Omnitrix, the Noctrix, as the entity had named it, glowed steadily against his wrist. The suppression agent had reduced the visible corruption in his veins, but the device itself remained transformed, its midnight blue light a constant reminder of his altered circumstances. A knock at the door preceded the sound of locks disengaging. The heavy oak swung open to reveal Wednesday, still dressed in perfect Gothic black despite the early hour. Her expression as impassive as ever. "You survived the night," she observed with what might have been approval. "Congratulations. The metaphysical disruption from your room registered on 3 different spectral monitors. Whatever dreams you experienced were broadcasting across at least 2-dimensional frequencies." Ben swung his legs over the side of the bed, rubbing his face. "The entity that corrupted the Omnitrix, it was communicating with me. Called this thing the Noctrix now." He raised his wrist, showing the device. It talked about something called the convergence. Wednesday's eyes narrowed fractionally, the only indication that his words had affected her at all. "Interesting. The convergence appears in certain obscure prophecies regarding Nevermore's founding purpose. Most students assume it's metaphorical, the coming together of supernatural communities. Your entity appears to have a more apocalyptic interpretation. It showed me realities collapsing," Ben confirmed. "Something emerging from between dimensions. It seems to think the Noctrix is necessary to stop it, or maybe to facilitate it." It wasn't exactly forthcoming with clear explanations. Interdimensional entities rarely are, Wednesday agreed. Their communication patterns reflect nonlinear temporal perception. What seems obscure may simply be information from a future or past we haven't experienced yet. She gestured toward the door. "Breakfast is being served. Your schedule has been arranged to include classes relevant to your situation, including interdimensional theory and containment protocols for sentient artifacts." Ben stood, suddenly aware he was still wearing yesterday's clothes, now rumpled from sleep. "I don't suppose there's a uniform policy here. Nevermore encourages sartorial expressions of one's supernatural heritage," Wednesday replied. "The wardrobe contains basic options. I took the liberty of requesting garments in black, as it provides optimal camouflage during inevitable nocturnal escapades." The practicality of this reasoning was hard to argue with. Ben investigated the wardrobe to find several sets of clothing, all in black or very dark colors, but otherwise similar to what he might have chosen himself. Jeans, t-shirts, hoodies, and a more formal outfit presumably for special occasions. "I'll wait outside," Wednesday stated, stepping back into the corridor and closing the door, though notably, not relocking it. Ben changed quickly, selecting jeans and a dark gray t-shirt beneath a black button-up left open. The clothes fit surprisingly well. The Noctrix continued to pulse gently against his wrist, its rhythm now synchronized with his heartbeat in a way the original Omnitrix never had been. The integration was progressing despite the suppression agent. When he emerged from the room, Wednesday gave him a clinical once-over. "Adequate. You'll blend with the general student population, aside from the interdimencio. Null energy signature and corrupted transformation device. Just another Wednesday at Nevermore, right?" Ben quipped, testing humor against her impassivity. Her expression didn't change, but something almost like amusement flickered in her eyes. "Indeed. Though I am Wednesday every day, not merely once a week." She led him through the academy's winding corridors, now filled with students hurrying to breakfast or early classes. The diversity of supernatural types was even more apparent in daylight, students with clearly non-human features moving alongside those who appeared conventionally but exhibited subtle signs of their differences. A girl whose hair moved like living flame, a boy who left frost footprints on the stone floor, twins who periodically switched physical positions without appearing to move. The great hall where breakfast was served resembled something from a Gothic fever dream, vaulted ceilings with stained glass depicting supernatural historical events, long tab. Less of dark wood polished to mirror shine, and floating candles that seemed to burn with different colored flames depending on the mood below them. Students turned to stare as Ben entered alongside Wednesday. Whispers immediately circulated, growing in volume and speculation with each retelling. "Interdimensional traveler. Corrupted transformation device. Special containment dormitory. Quote, Wednesday Addams is showing him around. Probably dangerous. Headmaster's orders. Wednesday ignored the speculation with practiced indifference, guiding Ben toward a table in a corner where fewer students gathered. The uninitiated masses will lose interest eventually. Nevermore's attention span for novelty rarely extends beyond 3 catastrophic incidents or 1 formal dance, whichever comes first. Food appeared on the tables through some mechanism Ben couldn't determine, platters materializing as if from nowhere, filled with options both familiar and decidedly not. Alongside convent, ional breakfast items sat dishes that pulsated gently, emitted unusual aromas, or changed color when approached. The kitchen attempts to accommodate all dietary requirements, Wednesday explained, electing plain toast from a floating platter. I recommend avoiding anything blue, glowing, or that appears to be watching you. Ben opted for safety, choosing scrambled eggs and what appeared to be normal bacon from the selection. As he ate, he studied his surroundings more carefully, noting exit points, defensive positions, and potential threats automatically. The tactical assessment was second nature after years of harrowing. A girl approached their table, tall and athletic with pink-streaked hair and a confident stride. She wore a Letterman jacket over a colorful outfit that stood in stark contrast to Wednesday's monochromatic preference. Her smile seemed genuine, but Ben noticed her eyes, sharp and assessing despite her friendly demeanor. Wednesday, she greeted with forced cheerfulness. Aren't you going to introduce your new friend? Wednesday didn't look up from her minimalist breakfast. Enid, this is Benjamin Tennyson, interdimensional traveler with a corrupted transformatio. N device of potentially apocalyptic significance. Ben, this is Enid Sinclair. Werewolf, school spirit enthusiast, perpetual optimist despite overwhelming evidence that the universe tends toward entropy and decay. Enid rolled her eyes good-naturedly. Always so dramatic. She extended a hand to Ben. Welcome to Nevermore. Don't let Wednesday convince you we're all doom and gloom around here. Some of us actually enjoy life. Ben shook her offered hand, noting the strength in her grip, carefully controlled but hinting at the supernatural power beneath her human appearance. Thanks. Still getting oriented to all of this. He gestured vaguely at the supernatural breakfast scene surrounding them. Headmaster Weems asked me to help with your orientation, Enid explained, sliding onto the bench across from him. I'm your official student guide while you're here. Wednesday's eyebrow arched fractionally. How fascinating. I received the same instruction. The two girls exchanged a look, loaded with unspoken history, not hostile exactly, but complicated in ways Ben couldn't immediately decipher. Double coverage, Enid said with forced brightness. Lucky you, Ben. Before the potentee, ally awkward moment could develop further, a chime sounded throughout the hall, melodic but with discordant undertones that set Ben's teeth on edge. First period, Wednesday announced, standing. Interdimensional theory. Professor Thornhill is pathologically punctual and enjoys making examples of latecomers by temporarily displacing their temporal signature. Ben grabbed a final piece of toast before following the two girls from the Great Hall, navigating the stream of students dispersing to various classrooms throughout the academy. The Omnitrix pulsed steadily against his wrist, a constant reminder of his predicament. Whatever the entity had meant about the convergence, whatever purpose it had in corrupting the Omnitrix, Ben was certain of one thing: his arrival at Nevermore Academy was no accident. The pieces were being arranged on the board for some cosmic game whose rules he didn't yet understand. But he'd faced worse odds before. The weight of galaxies had rested on his decisions since he was 10 years old. Different dimension, different challenges, but the core remained the same: protect the innocent, stop the threat, find a way home. And maybe, just maybe, discover why universe had deposited him in this particular reality, at this particular moment, with these particular people. The Omnitrix pulsed once more, stronger than before, as if in agreement with his determination. Whether ally or adversary, the corrupted device was part of him now, at least until he found a way to restore it. And Ben Tennyson had never backed down from a challenge yet. He followed Wednesday and Enid deeper into Nevermore Academy, stepping fully into whatever destiny awaited him in this dimension of monsters, magic, and mystery. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, The Outsider Within. The Classroom dedicated to interdimensional theory occupied what had once been an observatory tower, its domed ceiling now etched with constellations that subtly shifted position throughout the day. Curve. Ed walls supported bookshelves housing texts whose titles crawled across their spines like living things, occasionally rearranging themselves according to some arcane organizational system. At the M's center stood not desks but a circular arrangement of stone benches surrounding a complex three-dimensional model of intersecting planes, a physical representation of the multiverse theory rendered in brass, crystal, and what appeared to be materials not entirely bound by conventional physics. Ben followed Wednesday and Enid through the heavy oak door, instantly aware of the shift in atmosphere. The air here felt thinner somehow, charged with potential. The sensation reminded him of standing beside a dimensional portal, that peculiar pressure against one's skin as reality prepared to tear. Students already occupied most seats. Their attention focused on the model, which rotated slowly above a pedestal of polished obsidian. Ben noticed most gave the device a respectful berth, as though proximity might be dangerous. Thornhill's dimensional intersection model, Wednesday explained without being prompted. Constructed in 1887 using materials harvested from 17 different realities. 3 students have been permanently displaced after touching it without proper taumaturgical protection. The most recent in 2019 reportedly appears as a quantum ghost in the second-floor girls' bathroom every third Tuesday. She's exaggerating, Enid whispered, then paused. Mostly. Just don't touch it. They found seats on the far side of the circle, Wednesday positioning herself direct across from the entrance with clear sightlines to all potential approaches. The defensive positioning wasn't lost on Ben, who had instinctively calculated similar tactical advantages. The Omnitrix pulsed once against his wrist, as if approving the strategic thinking. A woman entered precisely as an antique clock in the corner struck the hour. Professor Thornhill moved with crisp efficiency. Her silver-streaked hair pulled back severely from a face that might have been 40 or 400. Something about her eyes suggested far greater age than her physical appearance indicated. She wore a tailored gray suit with subtle iridescent threads that caught the light as she moved, creating momentary rainbows that bent at impossible angles. Dimensional boundaries, she began without preamble, voice carrying easily despite its measured tone, are not walls but membranes. Permeable, responsive, intelligent in ways science has yet to quantify. Her gaze swept the classroom, pausing fractionally on Ben before continuing. Today we will discuss recent fluctuations in the Nevermore nexus and their implications for interdimensional stability. She approached the model, hands moving through practiced gestures that caused specific intersections to illuminate. The nexus has experienced 3 significant disruptions in the past week. The most recent, another gesture highlighted a pulsing point of midnight blue light that Ben recognized with uncomfortable familiarity, occurred approximately 14 hours ago in the eastern quadrant. Dimensional signatures suggest extratemporal origi, N with non-standard energy conversion patterns. The students murmured with interest, several turning to look directly at Ben. Professor Thornhill allowed the speculation to continue for precisely 5 seconds before continuing. We also have a new observer joining us today. She extended a hand toward Ben without looking at him. Mr. Tennyson carries first-hand experience of interdimensional transit. Perhaps he might share his perspective on membrane permeability during forced transition events. It wasn't really a request. Ben straightened, sensing the classroom's collective attention shifting to him. Years of experience as a public figure, both as himself and as various alien heroes, had taught him to handle scrutiny with calm confidence. The transition wasn't voluntary, he began, voice steady. During conflict with an interdimensional entity, my transformation device was corrupted. The dimensional shift felt like being pulled through something too dense, like liquid metal rather than a membrane. There was resistance, then sudden release. Fascinating, Professor Thornhill nodded, actually looking at him now with undisguised scientific interest. And the chronological displacement. Did you experience temporal dilation or compression during transit? The question caught Ben off guard. I'm not sure what you mean. The date, Mr. Tennyson. What date was it when you departed your dimension? October 27, 2023, Ben answered. A ripple of interest moved through the classroom. Professor Thornhill's eyebrows rose fractionally. Today is October 28, 1993, she stated. You've experienced a 30-year retrograde temporal shift alongside your dimensional displacement. Most interesting. Ben processed this information with a jolt of surprise he couldn't entirely conceal. 30 years in the past. The implications cascaded through his mind. Technology, history, events that hadn't happened yet. His parents would be teenagers now. Grandpa Max in his prime as a plumber. Azimuth working on early prototypes of what would become the Omnitrix. That's impossible, he said finally. The Omnitrix didn't exist in 1993. Professor Thornhill's smile carried the faintest edge of condescension. In your timeline, perhaps. Dimensional variants experience technological development at different rates. The multiverse model suggests infinite permutations of possibility. She turned back to the model, manipulating it to display a complex pattern of intersecting timelines. What exists in one timeline at point A may not manifest in another until point Y, or may never develop at all. While she continued her lecture, Ben noticed Wednesday studying him with renewed interest, her dark eyes calculating something he couldn't decipher. Enid, meanwhile, had discreet. Lee slid a folded note across the stone bench. Ben opened it to find elegant handwriting. Don't worry about the time thing. Nevermore exists partially outside normal chronology. Some students have come from the 1800s. Others from what they claim as the 2100s. Time is fluid here. Asterisk. The reassurance helped, though the temporal displacement added another layer of complexity to his situation. If he managed to return to his own dimension, would he also need to account for returning to the correct time period? The problem was beyond even what he'd encountered before. Professor Thornhill continued her lecture, discussing the properties of dimensional boundaries with the casual expertise of someone who had personally tested their limits. Ben absorbed the information eagerly, recognizing potential value for his situation. Interdimensional theory wasn't his specialty, but he'd encountered enough cross-dimensional threats to understand the basic principles. As the lecture progressed, Ben became aware of another student watching him with particular interest. She sat opposite his position in the circular arrangement, allowing him clear sight of her despite the rotating dimensional model between them. Unlike Wednesday's gothic aesthetic or Enid's colorful vibrancy, this girl presented a more subdued appearance. Dark auburn hair pulled back in a practical braid, wire-rimmed glasses perched on a freckled nose, and clothes that favored function over fashion. What caught Ben's attention wasn't her appearance but her focus, clinical, analytical, reminiscent of how Azimuth examined particularly interesting technological problems. When their eyes met across the dimensional model, she didn't look away as most would. Instead, her gaze dropped deliberately to the Omnitrix before returning to his face. One eyebrow raising in what might have been recognition. The Blackwood hypothesis, Professor Thornhill was saying, suggests that dimensional breaches follow predictable patterns based on resonant energy signatures. Miss Blackwood, perhaps you'd care to elaborate on your grandfather's theory. The auburn-haired girl straightened. Of course, Professor. The hypothesis proposes that interdimensional transit requires an anchor point in both origin and destination realities. These points must share harmonic frequencies to establish a stable connection. Her voice carried the precise diction of someone who chose words carefully, with a subtle accent Ben couldn't quite place. A corrupted anchor can result in uncontrolled transit or chronological slippage. Like my device, Ben murmured, glancing at the Omnitrix. Precisely, Mr. Tennyson, Professor Thornhill agreed, having apparently heard his quiet observation. Miss Blackwood's research focuses on identifying and stabilizing such anchor points. Perhaps you might find her insights valuable to your situation. The way she emphasized the final word carried implications Ben couldn't miss. Professor Thornhill knew more about his arrival than she was openly discussing. The Omnitrix pulsed once, stronger than its usual rhythm. Ben felt a momentary pressure behind his eyes, a sense of being observed not just by the claw's room's occupants but by something else, something watching through the device itself. The sensation passed quickly, but left an unsettling awareness in its wake. When class ended, students filed out with varied expressions of fascination or confusion. Interdimensional theory clearly challenged even Nevermore's supernatural students. Ben gathered the notebook he'd been provided. Its pages seemed to absorb ink in ways that made his notes appear three-dimensional when viewed from certain angles, and prepared to follow Wednesday and Enid to their next class. Mr. Tennyson, the auburn-haired G.I. R.L. Blackwood, had approached while Ben was distracted. Up close, he noticed details missed at a distance. Her eyes were an unusual shade of green with golden flecks that seemed to shift position when she blinked. A small device resembling an antique pocket watch hung from a chain at her waist. Her left hand bore a distinctive birthmark shaped almost like a stylized hourglass. "I'm Gwen Blackwood," she introduced herself without preamble. "Your transformation device. May I see it?" The directness caught Ben off guard. Most people approached the Omnitrix, now Noctrix, with more caution, especially after witnessing its effects. "It's not exactly stable at the moment," he warned, but extended his wrist nonetheless. Gwen studied the device without touching it, eyes narrowing as she observed the shifting symbols across its surface. "Impossible," she murmured, then louder. "The configuration principles are identical to theoretical models I've been developing. But the integration with biological systems is years beyond current capabilities." Something about her reminded Ben painfully of his cousin Gwen, the same analytical approach, the same fearless curiosity. Even the name was the same, which seemed too coincidental to dismiss. "You recognize the technology?" he asked carefully. "Not exactly, but..." Gwen hesitated, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "We should discuss this elsewhere. The resonance patterns your device is generating match experimental data from my grandfather's research. Research that's supposed to be theoretical only." Wednesday materialized beside them with her characteristic silent approach. "Blackwood, investigating our interdimensional visitor already? How predictably scientific of you." "Adams." Gwen's tone cooled noticeably. "STILL chasing supernatural conspiracy theories instead of conducting actual research. How predictably medieval of you." The tension between them was immediate and substantial. Ben recognized the signs of an established rivalry, academic, perhaps, but with deeper currents. Enid intervened with practiced diplomatic skill. "We have evolutionary biology of supernatural entities in 5 minutes. Professor Hydra takes attendance by scent, so we can't be late." She smiled at Gwen with what appeared to be genuine friendliness. "Maybe you can join us at lunch." The courtyard table, Gwen considered briefly before nodding. "I'd like that." Her eyes returned to Ben. "We have much to discuss, Mr. Tennyson." As she departed, Wednesday watched her retreat with narrowed eyes. "Blackwood's interest in you is concerning. Her family's research into dimensional travel has historically resulted in disappearances and unstable temporal anomalies." "You're one to talk about concerning family histories," Enid muttered, guiding them toward their next class. "At least the Blackwoods don't have a sentient disembodied hand as a butler. Thing provides excellent service and has never accidentally mauled dinner guests during full moons." Wednesday countered without heat, suggesting this was familiar territory in their complicated relationship. Ben filed away the information about both families for future reference. In a school full of supernatural beings, understanding the social hierarchy and historical tensions could prove essential to navigating his temporary residence. The day progressed through a curriculum unlike anything Ben had experienced. Evolutionary biology featured a professor whose upper body was human while her lower half comprised 8 arachnid legs that moved with unsettling grace among the specimen jars containing what appeared to be evolutionary stages of various supernatural species. Ancient languages was taught by identical triplets who spoke simultaneously in different dialects of forgotten tongues, occasionally causing small objects to materialize when certain combinations of sounds aligned. Physical education took place in a gymnasium whose dimensions seemed to shift depending on the exercise being performed, gravity strengthening or weakening to provide optimal resistance training for different supernatural physiologies. Throughout each class, Ben felt the constant awareness of being observed, not just by curious students but by faculty who seemed to assess him with more than academic interest. The Noctrix remained stable but continued its rhythmic pulsing, synchronized with his heartbeat but occasionally accelerating when he experienced stronger emotions. During lunch period, he found himself seated at a courtyard table with Wednesday, Enid, and several other students who had been introduced in rapid succession. The werewolf twins Ajax and Apollo, massive young men whose movements suggested barely contained power, Divina, a siren whose humming caused nearby flowers to bloom or wither depending on her mood, and Eugene, who appeared entirely human but whose shadow occasionally displayed additional limbs that operated independently. Conversation flowed around Ben as he ate, absorbing details of Nevermore's social structure through casual interactions. The hierarchy wasn't just about supernatural classifications but involved family histories, abilities, and accomplishments. Wednesday, despite, or perhaps because of, her antisocial tendencies, commanded a certain respect. Enid moved between social groups with practiced ease, maintaining connections across apparent boundaries. "So what exactly is your deal?" Ajax asked Ben directly, tearing into what appeared to be an extremely rare steak. "Wednesday says you're some kind of shapeshifter, but not like any known species." "Technically, I don't shapeshift," Ben explained, careful with his wording. "The device allows me to transform into different alien species by accessing their DNA. Or it did, before it was corrupted. Alien as in extraterrestrial," Eugene clarified, his shadow's extra arms making air quotes around the word. "Not extra-dimensional entities or phi creatures. Actual aliens," Ben confirmed. "Different planets, different evolutionary paths, different abilities." "Prove it," Apollo challenged, earning a sharp look from Enid. "He doesn't have to," she began. "It's fine," Ben interrupted. The Omnitrix had been stable throughout the morning, and while he wasn't eager to attempt transformation after what had happened with Ghost Freak Umbra, controlling his abilities would be essential for surviving at Nevermore. "I need to test it anyway." He stood, moving to an open area of the courtyard where accidental damage could be minimized. Students from other tables began to notice, conversations quieting as attention shifted toward the dimensional visitor's demonstration. The Omnitrix pulsed against his wrist, its midnight blue glow intensifying as Ben accessed the transformation controls. The dial felt different, heavier, resistant to his touch as if the device itself were reluctant or cautious. The holographic display that normally showed alien silhouettes now displayed shadowed versions, their forms distorted by the corruption. Ben recognized Heatblast's distinctive shape despite the alterations. The Pyronite was typically a safe, controllable transformation. Even corrupted, fire was fire, dangerous but manageable with proper focus. "Going hero," he muttered from habit, pressing down on the dial. Transformation energy erupted around him, but instead of the familiar green light, midnight blue and purple shadows enveloped his body. The process felt fundamentally wrong. Not the seamless reconfiguration of DNA he was accustomed to, but something more invasive, more deliberate in its restructuring. Pain followed, brief but intense as his molecular structure realigned according to the corrupted template. His skeleton elongated, muscle ND tissue burning away only to reform as something that existed between matter and energy. His consciousness expanded, perception shifting to accommodate new sensory input, heat signatures, radiation levels, the subtle electromagnetic fields generated by living beings. When the transformation completed, Ben stood taller than his human form, body composed of obsidian-like material riddled with fall T-lines through which dark flame pulsed like exposed veins. Where Heatblast generated bright orange fire, this form produced flames that burned midnight blue at their core, fading to deep violet at the edges. The flames consumed light rather than generating it, creating a localized darkness that seemed to bend shadows toward him. Heatblast. Infernal, he named the form, voice emerging as crackling whispers beneath roaring flames. The name came instinctively, implanted by the Omnitrix itself. The courtyard had gone silent, students staring with expressions ranging from fascination to alarm. Even Wednesday appeared momentarily taken aback, though she quickly masked it behind her usual impassivity. "Dude," Ajax breathed, "that's not like any fire elemental I've ever seen." Ben raised one hand, focusing on generating a controlled flame. Dark fire condensed above his palm, swirling into a perfect sphere that absorbed ambient light while emitting no illumination of its own. With careful precision, he expanded and contracted the sphere, testing the transformation's responsiveness to his commands. Control came easier than with Ghost Freak Umbra. This form, while corrupted, remained aligned with his consciousness rather than fighting against it. The sensation was exhilarating. Heatblast Infernal possessed all the pyrokinetic abilities of the original with apparent enhancements. The flames responded not just to physical direction but to intention, forming complex patterns with merely a thought. The corruption appears stable in this form, Wednesday observed, approaching fearlessly despite the dark fire. The spectral signature is contained rather than expanding. Interesting. Ben extinguished the sphere, noting how shadows seemed reluctant to release their pull toward him. It feels right, somehow. Like the form was incomplete before. That's the corruption talking, Enid warned, maintaining a respectful distance. Werewolf instinct recognizes predatory patterns. Whatever changed your device wants you comfortable with these new forms. Ben nodded, acknowledging the concern while processing the new sensory information Heatblast Infernal provided. He could perceive heat signatures through walls, identifying students moving through corridors beyond the courtyard. More concerning, he could somehow sense dimensional weak points, areas where reality seemed thinner, more permeable. Several such points pulsed at the edges of his awareness, concentrated beneath the Academy's foundations. A familiar figure approached from across the courtyard, Gwen Blackwood, carrying what appeared to be scientific instruments. Unlike the others, she showed no fear, only intense academic interest as she circled Heatblast Infernal, recording readings with her devices. Extraordinary, she murmured. The energy signature doesn't match any known elemental pattern. You're not channeling fire, you're generating anti-photonic matter that consumes light energy and converts it to heat. She looked up, meeting the glowing eyes of the transformed Ben without flinching. Can you control the radius of light absorption? Ben focused, concentrating on containing the darkness that naturally radiated from his form. The effort required more concentration than expected, suggesting the light-consuming property was fundamental to Heatblast Infernal rather than a secondary effect. Limited control, he confirmed. Voice still that unsettling mixture of whispers and flame. It's not the same as regular Heatblast. Everything's inverted. Gwen nodded, making notes on what app. ARED to be a small leather-bound journal. Consistent with dimensional inversion theory. Your device isn't malfunctioning, it's accessing inverted variants of your original transformations. Essentially, showing the dark matter versions that exist as theoretical counterparts to conventional forms. The scientific explanation provided a framework for understanding what had happened to the Omnitrix, but didn't explain why. Before Ben could question further, a piercing alarm echoed across the courtyard, 3 sharp tones followed by a sustained note that seemed to vibrate at a frequency just beyond comfortable hearing. Students immediately began moving with practiced coordination, gathering belongings and heading toward the main building. Enid's expression shifted to alert focus, her casual demeanor replaced by something more vigilant. Perimeter breach, she explained, gesturing for Ben to follow. Probably just another boundary test, but protocol requires all students to return to designated safe zones. Boundary test? Ben asked, maintaining his transformed state. Whatever was happening, Heatblast Infernal's abilities might prove useful. Nevermore's location exists at a nexus of dimensional boundaries. Wednesday explained as they moved against the flow of students, heading not toward the main building but around its perimeter. Certain factions periodically test our defenses, particularly during periods of dimensional instability. You're going the wrong way, Ben observed, noting their direction. We're not following protocol, Wednesday confirmed without slowing. We're investigating. The alarm originated from the eastern boundary, directly above one of the dimensional weak points you were sensing. Ben hadn't shared that observation aloud. How did you? Why? Our transformed state broadcasts certain perceptual data on psychic frequencies, she explained with clinical detachment. My abilities allow limited access to those broadcasts. Useful, if somewhat intrusive. Boundaries go both ways, Enid added, then glanced at Wednesday. We should stay with the other students. Whatever triggered the alarm is potentially connected to Ben's arrival, Wednesday finished. Correlation suggests causation in this instance. They reached a less populated area of the Academy grounds, near an ancient stone wall half covered in ivy whose leaves showed unusual coloration, deep purples and blues instead of expected greens. Beyond the wall, fog rolled through a dense forest whose trees grew at subtly wrong angles, branches reaching toward each other rather than toward sunlight. Ben's enhanced senses detected the dimensional weak point immediately, a shimmer in reality like heat distortion, but with occasional flashes of something else showing through, GLI. MPSES of another place that wasn't quite aligned with their current location. Gwen Blackwood materialized from between two ancient oak trees, startling Enid, who muttered something about academics with no self-preservation instinct. Gwen carried more sophisticated equipment now, a brass and crystal device that emitted soft pulses of light in response to the dimensional anomaly. Resonance patterns match exactly, she announced without preamble, showing her readings to Wednesday, who examined them with uncharacteristic interest. The frequency signature is identical to the one generated by Ben's device during transformation. Meaning what? Ben asked, the flames comprising Heatblast Infernal's head burning higher with his concern. Meaning, Gwen replied with academic precision, that either your arrival created these dimensional weak points, or these weak points facilitated your arrival. Causality is unclear, but the connection is undeniable. Further discussion halted as Movemen T appeared within the anomaly, shadowy figures approaching from the other side of the dimensional boundary. The figures lacked definite form, appearing as humanoid shapes composed of the same darkness that comprised Ben's flames. We need to alert the faculty, Enid insisted, backing away while keeping her eyes on the materializing figures. Too late, Wednesday observed as the first entity pushed through the dimensional barrier. Reality rippling around it like disturbed water. The creature that emerged stood approximately 7 feet tall, its form composed entirely of the same antiphotonic matter that constituted Heatblast Infernal's flames. It moved with deliberate precision, head swiveling to examine its surroundings before focusing on Ben with obvious recognition. 2 more entities followed, flanking the first as they advanced beyond the boundary. No features distinguished one from another. They existed as perfect silhouettes, 3-dimensional shadows that absorbed light from their surroundings. Vessel communicated the lead entity without sound, the concept inserted directly into their consciousness. Return. Ben recognized the mental signature immediately, identical to the entity that had corrupted the Omnitrix during his final battle in his home dimension. You followed me, he stated, moving protectively in front of the others. Preceded, awaited, guided, asterisk. The communication pattern matched what Ben had experienced in his dream. These weren't pursuing him, they were waiting for him, or something like him. The implications sent a chill through even Heatblast Infernal's flame-based physiology. They're not here for you, Wednesday deduced, watching the entities with clinical fascination rather than fear. They're here for the Noctrix. The lead entity extended what might have been an arm, the limb elongating impossibly toward Ben. Catalyst required. Surrender the key. Asterisk. Ben responded instinctively, generating a barrier of dark flame between the entities and his group. The antiphotonic fire erupted from the ground, forming a wall that momentarily halted the creature's advance. Get back to the main building, he ordered, maintaining focus on the barrier. Alert Headmaster Weems. Enid hesitated, clearly torn between following protocol and abandoning Ben to face the entities alone. Wednesday. Will also stay, Wednesday finished flatly. These entities possess interdimensional characteristics consistent with my research interests. Additionally, Ben's transformed state provides tactical advantages against their composition. I'm not leaving either, Gwen stated firmly, adjusting something on her equipment. These readings are unprecedented. Besides, she aimed the device at the nearest entity, which triggered a high-pitched neigh that caused the creature to momentarily destabilize. My grandfather's research included theoretical countermeasures for exactly this type of dimensional incursion. The lead entity recovered quickly, its form reconsolidating as it assessed the new threat. With a movement too fast to follow clearly, it struck at Gwen's device, knocking it from her hands and shattering the delicate components. Ben acted without hesitation, channeling dark fire through the ground beneath the entities. The antiphotonic flames erupted upward, engulfing the creatures in energy that should have, logically, destroyed them. Instead, the entities absorbed the flames, growing more substantial with each moment of contact. They're feeding on the same energy you're generating, Gwen realized aloud. Dimensional counterparts. Your transformation and these entities share fundamental composition. Then we need something opposite, Ben concluded, reaching for the Noctrix symbol on his chest. If these creatures consumed antiphotonic energy, perhaps standard photonic energy would prove effective. Before he could attempt to change forms, the lead entity moved with impossible speed, closing the distance between them in less than a heartbeat. It struck the Noctrix symbol directly, causing an explosion of midnight blue energy that threw everyone backward. Pain lanced through Ben's transformed body as the Noctrix reacted violently to the entity's touch. Dark flames erupted uncontrollably from his form, spiraling outward in patterns that resembled the symbols etched across the device's surface. For a moment, Ben felt his consciousness fragmenting, portions of his awareness connecting to other places, other times, other versions of himself across countless dimensions. The connections destabilizing. Gwen shouted, scrambling toward Ben while avoiding grasping tendrils of shadow. The transformation will collapse. Wednesday moved with unexpected swiftness, retrieving a small silver object from within her dress, the same amulet she'd used to disrupt Ghostfreak Umbra. She pressed it directly against the Noctrix symbol, channeling whatever power the artifact contained. Enid, now, she commanded. The werewolf girl hadn't retreated after all. At Wednesday's signal, she leapt forward with supernatural speed, her form blurring as partial transformation took hold, not the complete wolf form of full moon nights, but an enhanced state that lengthened her limbs, sharpened her features, and covered her exposed skin with a light dusting of fur. Enid tackled the lead entity with precisely calculated force, driving it away from Ben as Wednesday's amulet stabilized the Noctrix's reaction. The entity dissolved around Enid's impact, temporarily losing cohesion before beginning to reform several feet away. The Noctrix is stabilizing, Gwen reported, monitoring the energy fluctuations with her remaining equipment. But these entities are persistent. They'll continue attempting to access it unless we close the dimensional breach. Quote, Ben regained control of his transformation, the wild flames retracting to their proper boundaries. How do we close it? Gwen's expression turned grim. We need to generate a dimensional resonance wave precisely calibrated to the breach's frequency, then invert the polarity to force closure. She gestured to her broken equipment, which would be considerably easier with functional instruments. Quote, the entities had regrouped, apparently communicating among themselves without visible or audible signs. Their strategy shifted. Instead of directly attacking Ben, they began moving toward different positions around their group, attempting to encircle them. Wednesday watched their movement with calculating eyes. They're herding us toward the dimensional breach. They want to force us through to their reality. Not all of us, Gwen corrected. Ben specifically. We're just obstacles. Enid maintained her partially transformed state, claws extended as she tracked the entity's movements. Whatever they want, they're not getting it. Ben, can you generate any other type of energy with this form? Something that doesn't feed them. Ben focused inward, exploring Heatblast Infernal's capabilities more deeply. The primary ability involved anti-photonic fire, but beneath that, something else pulsed, a more fundamental control over energy conversion itself. If he could reverse the process, turning the light-consuming property into light-generating. Stand back, he warned, concentrating intensely on the energy flowing through his transformed body. The effort was immense, like trying to force water uphill, but gradually the dark flames flickering across his form began to change, midnight blue lightening to indigo, then violet, then finally igni. Ting into brilliant white fire that illuminated the area with blinding intensity. The entities recoiled immediately, their shadow-like forms dissolving where the purified light touched them. They retreated toward the dimensional breach, seeming to lose substance with each moment of exposure. It's working, Enid confirmed, shielding her sensitive eyes from the radiance. Not for long, Gwen cautioned, monitoring Ben's energy output. The transformation is destabilizing again. This form wasn't designed to generate photonic energy, you're forcing it against its fundamental nature. She was right. Ben could feel Heatblast Infernal's structure beginning to break down, the Noctrix struggling to maintain a transformation being pushed beyond its corrupted parameters. Pain lanced through him with each pulse of white fire, molecular bonds threatening to dissolve completely. I can hold it long enough, he gritted through the agony, advancing on the retreating entities. Get clear in case this goes wrong. Instead of retreating, Wednesday stepped forward, pressing her silver amulet against his arm. This will help stabilize the molecular breakdown, she explained clinically. Temporarily, with Wednesday's artifact providing stability, Ben channeled everything into one final surge of purified energy. White fire erupted from his hands, engulfing the entities and the dimensional breach behind them. Reality itself seemed to bend under the strain, the weak point contracting as the entities were forced back through to their original dimension. The lead entity, nearly dissolved but still maintaining partial cohesion, communicated one final message before disappearing completely. The Noctrix evolves. The convergence approaches. We will return, vessel. Asterisk. The dimensional breach collapsed with an implosion of air that knocked everyone to the ground, leaves and debris swirling in suddenly vacated space. In the aftermath, silence fell, broken only by their heavy breathing and distant alarms still sounding from the main academy. Ben felt the transformation failing, his control slipping as Heatblast Infernal's form began to break down. The reversion happened violently, not the smooth transition he was accustomed to, but a painful reconstruction that left him gasping on hands and knees in his human form, the Noctrix smoking slightly on his wrist. That, Enid observed as she helped him to his feet. Her own transformation receding was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. I haven't decided which. The two aren't mutually exclusive, Wednesday noted, examining her amulet, which now displayed a crack across its surface. Though effective, regardless of classification. Gwen was already documenting the event, salvaging what data she could from her damaged EQU. IP meant while examining the space where the dimensional breach had been. The resonance patterns are still present, just dormant. You didn't destroy the weak point, you forced it into temporary remission. Meaning they can come back. Ben concluded, examining the Noctrix. The device appeared unchanged despite the strain it had endured, though the symbols etched across its surface had shifted to new configurations. Inevitable, given the progressive nature of dimensional degradation, Wednesday confirmed. Though your methods proved unexpectedly effective for initial countermeasures. The distant alarms finally silenced, replaced by the sound of approaching footsteps as faculty members arrived at the scene. Leading them was Headmaster Weems, her expression unreadable as she surveyed the aftermath of the confrontation. Miss Adams, Miss Sinclair, Miss Blackwood, her gaze finally settled on Ben. Mr. Tennyson, I see you've encountered our persistent visitors. Her calm reaction to dimensional entities suggested this wasn't unprecedented at Nevermore Academy. Ben straightened, meeting her gaze directly. They were after the Noctrix. They called it the key, and me, the vessel. Hay mentioned something called the convergence. Weems's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes at the mention of convergence, recognition, perhaps, or concern carefully masked. I see. Perhaps you four would join me in my office to discuss this incident more thoroughly. She turned to the faculty members who had accompanied her. Professor Thornhill, please conduct a complete resonance scan of the perimeter. Professor Hyde, secure any affected students to the infirmary for examination. As they followed Headmaster Weems back toward the main building, Ben noticed the other students watching from windows and doorways, their expressions ranging from fear to excitement to suspicion. News would spread quickly. The new interdimensional student had faced shadow entities and survived. How that would affect his standing in Nevermore's complex social hierarchy remained to be seen. The Noctrix pulsed against his wrist, its rhythm once again synchronized with his heartbeat. The confrontation had demonstrated both the potential and the danger of his corrupted transformations. Heatblast Infernal possessed greater power than the original Heatblast, but that power came with significant risks, to himself and potentially to others. I need to learn to control these new forms, he murmured, half to himself. Yes, Weems agreed without turning, apparently having heard despite the distance between them. You do, which is why, effective immediately, you'll be receiving specialized training in addition to your regular curriculum. Headmaster Weems's office i.e. the highest point of Nevermore Academy's central tower, a circular room whose windows overlooked the entire campus and surrounding wilderness. Unlike the Gothic severity that characterized most of the academy, her personal space displayed eclectic taste spanning centuries and cultures, artifacts from various historical periods arranged with careful precision alongside books whose titles shifted depending on the angle from which they were viewed. Sit, she instructed, gesturing to chairs that materialized from what had appeared to be solid floor moments before. When all four students were seated, Weems took her position behind an ornate desk crafted from what appeared to be a single piece of wood so dark it absorbed light rather than reflecting it. Its surface held only 3 objects, a silver bell without a clapper, a quill pen that occasionally shifted position without being touched, and a crystal sphere containing what looked like miniature galaxies in constant motion. The entities you encountered are known as Void Walkers, she began without preamble. They exist in the spaces between dimensions, neither fully material nor entirely energy-based. Nevermore Academy has documented their appearances since 1784, though historical records suggest encounters dating back to ancient Sumeria. They recognized the Omnitrix, Ben stated. Called it the key. Weems nodded, studying him with renewed interest. The corruption of your device is not random, Mr. Tennyson. The Void Walkers have long sought artifacts capable of dimensional manipulation. Your Omnitrix, with its ability to fundamentally restructure biological matter, represents a particular prize. But why corrupt it? Gwen asked, her scientific curiosity evident. If they wanted the device, why change its fundamental operating parameters? Because they don't want what it was, Wednesday deduced before Weems could answer. They want what it could become. The Omnitrix. Precisely, Miss Adams. Weems earned her attention to the crystal sphere, which responded to her focus by displaying a particular galaxy in greater detail. Nevermore Academy was founded for many purposes, but chief among them was monitoring dimensional boundaries. The location was chosen specifically for its proximity to what we call the Nexus, a convergence point of multiple dimensional planes. The dimensional weak points I sensed, Ben realized. They're part of this Nexus. Manifestations of it, yes. Weems manipulated the sphere, causing the image to shift to what appeared to be a map of ley lines running beneath the Academy grounds. These energy pathways connect the weak points, forming a geometric pattern that, when activated under specific circumstances, could potentially open a gateway between all dimensions simultaneously. The convergence, Enid said, connecting the pieces. That's what they meant. Weems's expression darkened slightly. The convergence is mentioned in Nevermore's founding document. TS is an event to be prevented at all costs. If all dimensional boundaries collapsed simultaneously, the resulting chaos would destroy not just our reality but countless others. And the Omnitrix is somehow related to this, Ben concluded, examining the corrupted device on his wrist with new concern. They called me the vessel, and it the key. Your transformation demonstrated a critical capability, Gwen observed. The ability to generate both antiphotonic and photonic energy from the same source. Theoretically, that kind of energy conversion could stabilize a trans-dimensional portal long enough for sustained transit. Or destabilize the entire nexus if applied incorrectly, Wednesday added, her usual monotone carrying an edge of genuine concern. The amulet I used belonged to my ancestor Goody Adams, who documented encounters with entities matching the Void Walker's description. Her journal mentions the great unmaking they sought to bring about. Headmaster Weems regard each student carefully before continuing. Nevermore has always attracted those with connections to dimensional boundaries, students whose abilities or lineage tie them to the spaces between conventional realities. Miss Adams's psychic abilities allowing perception of death across dimensional barriers. Miss Sinclair's lycanthropy connecting her to primal forces that exist in multiple planes simultaneously. Miss Blackwood's family research into dimensional travel. And now you, Mr. Tennyson, with a device capable of transforming into entities from beyond our dimensional sphere. You think we're connected to the convergence somehow, Ben stated rather than asked. I think, Weems replied carefully, that coincidence is a luxury those who study dimensional phenomena cannot afford. Your arrival at this particular time, with that particular device, encountering these particular students, patterns suggest purpose. The implications hung heavy in the air. If their meeting wasn't coincidence but cosmic design, what did that mean for their individual choices? Their futures. So what happens now? Enid asked, breaking the momentary silence. We just wait for more Void Walkers to attack. We prepare, Weems corrected. Mr. Tennyson requires training to control his corrupted transformations. Miss Blackwood will continue her research into dimensional stabilization techniques. Ms. S. Adams will expand her investigation of historical encounters with Void Walkers. And Miss Sinclair will assist in security protocols for the coming full moon, when dimensional boundaries naturally thin. She rose from her desk, indicating the meeting was concluding. Additionally, I'm granting you 4 access to restricted areas of the Academy Library. The Midnight section contains texts relate D to the Nexus and the Convergence that may prove valuable to your understanding of our current situation. As they prepared to leave, Weems addressed Ben directly. Mr. Tennyson, remain a moment. When the others had departed, Wednesday with obvious reluctance and a suspicious backward glance, Weems studied Ben with an intensity that suggested she was seeing more than his physical appearance. Why? Our arrival has accelerated certain events that were already in motion, she stated plainly. The Void Walkers have been increasingly active over the past 6 months, testing our boundaries with growing frequency. Your presence, and particularly your device, represents both opportunity and risk. You want to use the Omnitrix to strengthen the dimensional boundaries, Ben deduced, recognizing the tactical assessment in her words. If possible, Weems acknowledged. But more importantly, we must prevent the Void Walkers from using it to facilitate the convergence. To that end, you will begin specialized training immediately. Professor Thornhill will oversee transformation control exercises. Dr. Kinboat will continue monitoring the corruption's progression. And I will personally instruct you in dimensional theory as it relates to Nevermore's unique position. Ben considered her words carefully. There's something you're not telling me. A ghost of a smile touched Weems's lips. There are many things I'm not telling you, Mr. Tennyson. Information has power at Nevermore, particularly regarding dimensional matters. What I've shared is what you need to know at present to begin addressing your situation. And what do you get out of this arrangement? Ben pressed, unwilling to accept partial explanations when so much seemed at stake. Weems regarded him for a long moment before answering. Nevermore Academy has stood guard over the Nexus for centuries, Mr. Tennyson. Each headmaster accepts responsibility not just for students' education but for maintaining the dimensional boundaries that prevent catastrophe. My interest is preservation of this institution, this reality, and all others connected to it. It wasn't a complete answer, but Ben recognized he wouldn't get more at present. Weems was clearly accustomed to managing information carefully, revealing only what served immediate purposes. One last question, he said as he prepared to leave. The other students who've gone missing near dimensional weak points, were they taken by Void Walkers? Weems's expression remained carefully neutral. An excellent question. Perhaps your new access to the Midnight section will help you discover the answer. The Nevermore Academy Library occupied what had once been a cathedral, its soaring arches and flying buttresses now supporting countless bookshelves that extend not just along walls but impossibly into space, defying conventional architecture. Books floated between levels, reorganizing themselves according to some arcane system comprehensible only to the library staff. 3 identical elderly women who moved with synchronized precision despite never appearing to communicate with each other. The Midnight section occupied the former chancel, separated Fr. owned the main library by a wrought iron gate whose bars formed complex mathematical equations that continuously recalculated themselves. A sign beside the gate read simply, "Authorized personnel only. Temporal distortion possible. Dimensional collapse probable." Wednesday approached the gate with confidence, presenting a small card Headmaster Weems had provided. The equations paused in their endless reconfiguration, seeming to evaluate the authorization before the gate swung open with a sound like distant wind chimes. The Midnight section operates under different temporal rules, she explained as they entered. Time passes inconsistently relative to the outside world. Don't be alarmed if you experience chronological side effects. Side effects? Ben asked, following her into the restricted area. Precognitive flashes, retroactive memory formation, temporary age regression, she listed clinically. Nothing permanent, usually. The Midnight section lived up to its name, the lighting. Here dimmed to a perpetual twilight state, with small floating spheres of blue-white light illuminating reading areas. Books here didn't merely sit on shelves but occasionally shifted position, some penning themselves to particular pages when approached, others shrinking away as if avoiding attention. Gwen and Enid were already present, Gwen absorbed in what appeared to be architectural diagrams of Nevermore's foundations. Enid cataloging surveillance reports of previous dimensional incursions. Find anything? Ben asked, joining them at a massive table crafted from what appeared to be petrified wood. Plenty, Gwen replied without looking up. The Academy was deliberately constructed over a natural dimensional nexus point. The foundations incorporate materials from at least 17 different realities, creating a stable framework that actually reinforces dimensional boundaries rather than weakening them. Architectural dimensional reinforcement, Ben mused, familiar with simila. Are concepts from plumber installations designed to contain dangerous interdimensional criminals. So the school itself is a containment device. More like a cork in a dimensional bottle, Enid clarified, showing him a historical photograph of the Academy grounds before construction began. Where Nevermore now stood, the image showed a perfect circle of barren earth surrounded by lush forest, a Nadu. Raw dead zone centered on the nexus point. Wednesday had disappeared among the shifting shelves, returning moments later with a leather-bound volume that appeared to be crying softly. The personal journal of Goody Adams. From her time as Nevermore's first-dimensional security officer. She placed the weeping book carefully on the table, opening it to reveal pages covered in handwriting that periodically rearranged itself into different languages. My ancestor documented the first modern encounter with void walkers in 1693, she continued, finding a particular passage. They emerged following a ritual performed by a student attempting to resurrect her deceased familiar. The breach remained open for 3 days, during which 6 students disappeared and another 8 experienced NT shadow contamination, likely early corruption similar to what's affecting your device. Ben examined the journal with interest, noting detailed sketches of the entities that matched what they'd encountered earlier. Goody Adams had been a precise observer, documenting not just appearances but behavior patterns, weaknesses, and apparent objectives. She used silver and iron to repel them, Ben noted, pointing to a particular passage. That's why your amulet was effective against both Ghostfreak Umbra and during today's encounter. Silver represents lunar energy, illumination in darkness. Iron grounds unstable dimensional energy, Wednesday explained. Basic metaphysical principles, though the scientific explanation likely involves molecular resonance disruption at quantum levels. Gwen looked up with interest. That's actually a reasonable hypothesis. Certain metallic alloys could theoretically generate counter-frequencies to disrupt dimensional phasing. The occult and scientific often describe the same phenomena through different linguistic frameworks, Wednesday replied with the faintest suggestion of smugness. Their research continued as afternoon faded into evening, each following different threads that gradually wove into a more comprehensive understanding. The Void Walkers had made periodic attempts to access the Nexus throughout Nevermore's history, each seeking a different artifact or individual who might serve as a catalyst for the convergence. Previous headmasters had documented these attempts, developing increasingly sophisticated defenses in response. The missing students, Enid said suddenly, having found personnel records from the past 50 years. They all disappeared near dimensional weak points, but there's something else connecting them. She spread several student files across the table. Each one possessed an unusual ability or artifact related to dimensional manipulation. Ben examined the files with growing concern. They were targeted specifically, not random disappearances. Precisely, Wednesday confirmed. The Void Walkers have been systematically removing potential obstacles or acquiring potential tools, depending on perspective. Which means they see us as either obstacles or tools, Gwen concluded grimly. Based on today's encounter, I'm guessing Ben falls into the tool category. The Omnitrix pulsed against Ben's wrist, as if acknowledging its central role in whatever cosmic drama was unfolding around them. He had arrived at Nevermore less than 24 hours ago, yet already found himself NGLED in dimensional conspiracies and ancient conflicts. We need more information about the convergence itself, he decided, focusing on the central mystery. What exactly would happen if all diamonds' ional boundaries collapsed simultaneously? What's the endgame for these entities? Wednesday disappeared once more among the shelves, returning this time with a tome bound in what appeared to be iridescent scales that shifted color depending on who was looking at them. The Codex Dimensionum, she introduced the volume. Compiled by Archmage Blackwood in 1872. Gwen's head snapped up. My great-great-grandfather's work. It's supposed to be lost. Merely restricted, Wednesday corrected, opening the massive book with care. Nevermore acquired it following his disappearance during the Rotterdam incident. The pages contained diagrams of impossible complexity, mathematical formulae that extended into 3 dimensions, rising from the page in glowing lines before collapsing back into flat representations. Illustrations of cosmological models that rotated slowly to show all perspectives simultaneously, text written in languages that appeared to have evolved in realities with different physical constants. Here, Wednesday indicated a section titled simply, Convergentia, the most comprehensive theoretical model of complete dimensional collapse. The description was simultaneously technical and poetic, scientific and mystical, as if the author had struggled to capture concepts that human language was fundamentally inadequate to express. What emerged through the dense text was a vision of cosmic annihilation unlike anything even Ben had encountered in his extensive hero career. The convergence wouldn't just destroy individual dimensions, Gwen translated, her expression growing increasingly troubled. It would collapse the fundamental barriers between all possible realities, creating a single point of infinite density, essentially a multiverse-scale black hole from which nothing, not even possibility itself, could escape. The unmaking of everything that is, was, or could be, Wednesday summarized with characteristic brevity. But why would the Void Walkers want that? Enid asked, the practical question cutting through abstract cosmological horror. Wouldn't they be destroyed too? Ben remembered something the entity had communicated during his dream: resistance is evolution. Maybe destruction isn't their goal, he suggested. Maybe they see the convergence as a transformation, breaking down what exists now to create something new, something they can control or inhabit. Cosmic scale adaptive evolution, Gwen mused, considering the theory. If they exist in the spaces between dimensions, perhaps they seek to expand their habitat by eliminating the boundaries altogether. Their discussion was interrupted by a sudden shift in the library's atmosphere, the floating lights dimming momentarily as a wave of what felt like static electricity washed through the midnight section. Books returned to shelves of their own accord as one of the identical librarians materialized beside their table. Closing time, she announced, voice echoing strangely, as if speaking from multiple temporal positions simultaneously. Dimensional refraction has reached critical threshold for today. Further research risks temporal contamination. As they gathered their notes and prepared to leave, Ben noticed something unusual, a book that hadn't been on their table moments before, bound in midnight blue leather with silver clasps that matched the color of the Noctrix. When he reached for it, the book shuddered slightly before opening to a specific page. The text appeared to be written in the same strange symbols that crawled across the Noctrix's surface, incomprehensible yet somehow familiar. As Ben studied the page, the symbols briefly shifted, resolving into English for just long enough to read a single sentence. The bearer of the Noctrix stands at the crossroads of destruction and creation, vessel and key, sacrifice and savior. Asterisk. Then the symbols returned to their original state, the book closing itself with a soft but definitive snap. Did you see that? He asked the others. See what? Enid looked confused, staring at the empty table where Ben's gaze was fixed. The book had vanished completely, leaving no evidence it had ever existed. Nothing, he said finally. Just tired, I guess. As they exited the midnight section, passing back through the equation-inscribed gate, Ben felt a momentary disorientation, as if he had briefly existed in multiple times simultaneously. The sensation passed quickly, but left an unsettling awareness of temporal fragility. The main library had emptied of students, evening shadows lengthening across ancient stones. Through high windows, Ben could see stars appearing in the darkening sky, constellations unlike those from his home dimension, arranged in patterns that seemed to hold meaning just beyond his comprehension. Dinner will be served soon, Enid noted, checking an unusual watch whose hands occasionally moved backward. We should probably try to act normal, avoid drawing more attention after what happened today. Normality is a subjective construct with no objective measurement criteria, Wednesday observed. But nutritional intake is biologically necessary, regardless of dimensional complications. They made their way through Nevermore's corridors, now illuminated by floating lanterns that cast moving shadows across Gothic architecture. Other students they passed regarded them with varying degrees of curiosity, respect, and wariness. News of the dimensional encounter had clearly spread throughout the academy, elevating their status while simultaneously marking them as potentially dangerous. In the Great Hall, they found seats at a table somewhat removed from the main student population. Dinner materialized much as breakfast had, platters appearing from nowhere, offering options that ranged from conventional to decidedly supernatural in origin. As they ate, Ben noticed a subtle shift in group dynamics. This morning, they had been strangers brought together by circumstance and administrative assignment. Now, after facing dimensional entities together and delving into restricted knowledge, something more cohesive had formed. Not quite friendship yet, but a shared purpose that transcended individual differences. Wednesday remained outwardly impassive but had positioned herself where she could monitor approaches to their table, a protective stance she would never verbally acknowledge. Enid maintained her friendly demeanor while subtly scanning for potential threats among the student body. Gwen divided her attention between her meal and notes she continued to take on dimensional theory. And Ben found himself studying each of them with greater attention, recognizing strengths and abilities that complemented his own. If the Void Walkers returned, and they would, eventually, this unlikely team represented his best chance of understanding and controlling the Noctrix's corruption. We should establish a research and training schedule, Gwen suggested, breaking the contemplative silence. I can work on developing scientific countermeasures against dimensional incursions. Wednesday clearly has access to occult knowledge that complements my approach. Enid's combat abilities and knowledge of Nevermore's security protocols are tactically valuable. And Ben needs to systematically test each transformation to establish capabilities and limitations. Structured preparation would maximize effectiveness against future encounters, Wednesday agreed. Though probability suggests the Void Walkers will adapt their approach based on today's failure. They'll come after Ben directly next time, Enid predicted, which means one of us should be with him at all times. A monitoring rotation, Gwen nodded. Logical and efficient. Ben raised an eyebrow. Don't I get a say in this? 3 pairs of eyes turned to him with varying expressions. Wednesday's clinical assessment, Enid's concerned determination, Gwen's scientific interest. You possess a device of potentially catastrophic dimensional significance, Wednesday stated flatly. Your preference for solitude is outweighed by existential considerations. What she means, Enid translated with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, as that we're not letting you face interdimensional shadow monsters alone just because you might want privacy. I'm primarily interested in studying the Noctrix's energy signatures. Gwen added more practically, which requires proximity. Ben recognized the logic in their position, even if it chafed slightly against his usual independence. In his home dimension, he'd operated with family support but often handled threats alone when necessary. Here, without that established network, these 3 represented his best, perhaps only, allies in understanding what had happened to the Omnitrix and finding a way home. All right, he conceded, but we do this systematically. Controlled transformation tests, research into the convergence and how to prevent it, and finding a way to reverse the corruption if possible. Agreed, Gwen nodded, already outlining a schedule in her notebook. We should begin tomorrow with baseline measurements of the Noctrix's energy output during inactive states, then progress to controlled transformation tests in a secure environment. As they finalized plans for the coming days, Ben felt the Noctrix pulse against his wrist, not its usual rhythm synchronized with his heartbeat, but something more deliberate, almost like Morse code. 3 short pulses, 3 long, 3 short again. SOS. He glanced at the device with concern. But its appearance remained unchanged. Midnight blue glow steady, corrupted symbols shifting subtly across its surface. The SOS pattern repeated once more before returning to normal synchronization with his pulse. Was the original Omnitrix still active somewhere beneath the corruption? A message from Azimuth, perhaps, or some emergency protocol trying to break through? Or was this another aspect of the corruption? Another way the entity was attempting to manipulate him? Ben kept the observation to himself for now, until he understood more about what was happening to the device, and to himself. Sharing every detail might create unnecessary concerns. As dinner concluded and students began dispersing to evening activities, Headmaster Weems appeared beside their table with her characteristic silent approach. I trust your research proved illuminating, she said, though her tone suggested she already knew exactly what they had discovered. The Midnight section has a way of providing precisely the information one needs, often before one realizes the need exists. We found historical records of Void Walker incursions, Gwen reported, and theoretical models of the convergence. But not how to reverse the corruption of the Omnitrix, Ben added, watching Weems carefully for any reaction. Her expression remained neutral, but something flickered briefly in her eyes, concern, perhaps, or calculation. Some answers reveal themselves only when one has asked the correct questions, Mr. Tennyson. The corruption of your device may be less about reversal and more about direction. Before Ben could press for clarification, Weems continued, Miss Sinclair will escort you to the physical training facilities. Professor Hyde has prepared a containment chamber for your transformation exercises. I suggest beginning with forms you've already experienced, Ghost Freak Umbra and Heat Blast Infernal, before attempting unknown transformations. The dismissal was clear despite its polite phrasing. As they left the Great Hall, Ben contemplated Weems's cryptic statement about the corruption's direction. The headmaster clearly knew more than she was sharing, about the Noctrix, about the Void Walkers. About Ben's role in whatever cosmic drama was unfolding around Nevermore Academy. The training facility occupied a subterranean level beneath what had once been the Academy's chapel. Accessed through a spiraling staircase whose steps occasionally rearranged themselves in patterns that somehow always led to the correct destination regardless of the path taken. Professor Hyde, a broad-shouldered man whose features seemed to subtly shift between two distinct appearances, waited beside a reinforced door marked with both conventional hazard symbols and more esoteric warnings etched in silver and iron. The containment chamber is designed to withstand various supernatural manifestations, he explained, voice fluctuating between a cultured British accent and a rougher, more guttural tone. Force fields, metaphysical barriers, temporal stabilizers. Whatever your transformations produce, this room should contain it. The chamber beyond proved impressive, a circular AR space approximately 50 feet in diameter with walls of polished stone inscribed with protective symbols. Equipment for monitoring various energy types occupied a protected observation area behind what appeared to be 6 inches of transparent material that was definitely not conventional glass. I'll monitor from outside, Gwen stated, heading toward the complex equipment. These sensors show LD provide comprehensive data on the Noctrix's energy signatures during transformation. I'll maintain visual observation from the monitoring station, Wednesday added. My psychic abilities may detect ECT fluctuations in consciousness during metamorphosis. Enid hesitated before joining them. Be careful, she told Ben with genuine concern. If anything feels wrong, anything at all, end the transformation immediately. When Ben stood alone in the center of the containment chamber, Professor Hyde sealed the heavy door with both conventional and mystical locking mechanisms. His voice came through speakers recessed in the ceiling. Begin whenever you're ready, Mr. Tennyson. We're recording all telemetry. Ben examined the Noctrix, which pulsed with steady midnight blue light against his wrist. The corrupted device had demonstrated both danger and potential during his limited transformations. Ghost Freak Umbra had nearly overwhelmed his consciousness, while Heat Blast Infernal had provided enhanced powers at the cost of significant physical strain. All right, he muttered, accessing the transformation controls. Let's see what you're really capable of. The holographic display materially Z, not the familiar green silhouettes of his alien roster, but midnight blue shadows of corrupted variants. He selected Heat Blast Infernal first, the form he had most successfully controlled during the confrontation with the Void Walkers. As his hand descended on the activation control, Ben focused his thoughts on maintaining absolute consciousness throughout the transformation. No matter what the corruption attempted, he would remain in control. His identity, his power, his choice. The Noctrix activated, midnight blue energy engulfing his form as reality bent around him once more. The transformation began. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3, The Nature of Monsters. Morning light filtered through the leaded glass windows of Nevermore Academy's East Tower, casting geometric patterns across ancient stone floors. Ben Tennyson sat cross-legged in the center of Wednesday Adams' personal research sanctum, a circular room whose walls disappeared behind overcrowded bookshelves, specimen jars containing improbable anatomical samples, and artifacts that occasionally moved of their own accord when not being directly observed. 3 days had passed since his controlled transformation exercises in the containment chamber. 3 days of rigorous testing, meticulous documentation, and increasingly complex theories about the Omnitrix's corruption. The midnight blue device pulsed steadily against his wrist as Wednesday circled him. Silver pendulum suspended from a chain wound through her fingers. Your biological resonance has shifted again, she observed, watching the pendulum swing in a pattern that defied conventional physics. The corruption progresses despite suppression measures. Ben examined the veins visible beneath his skin, thin lines of midnight blue that had spread from beneath the Omnitrix, now extending halfway to his elbow. Dr. Kinbote's suppressant slowed the progression but couldn't halt it entirely. Rate of spread, approximately 0.27 mm per hour. Acceler, aiding during periods of emotional intensity or physical exertion. Wednesday made another notation in her leather-bound journal, the pages of which appeared to be made from material Ben preferred not to identify. At current progression rates, complete integration will occur in approximately 17 days. And then what happens? Ben kept his voice neutral despite the implications. Wednesday paused her examination, dark eyes meeting his directly. Unknown. Historical precedents are limited and uniformly terminal. However, those cases lacked your unique physiological adaptability and transformation experience. She resumed her measurements without further comment on his potential demise. Their research partnership had developed rapidly over the past 3 days, Wednesday's occult knoll edge complementing Ben's practical experience with the Omnitrix. Where Gwen approached the Omnitrix's corruption through scientific methodology and Enid focused on practical containment strategies, Wednesday pursued metaphysical understanding of the transformation process itself. The integration appears symbiotic rather than parasitic, she continued, setting aside the pendulum to retrieve a cries. Tall prism that fractured light into spectra invisible to normal human perception. The Omnitrix isn't consuming you so much as evolving alongside you. That's what the entities kept saying. Ben rotated his wrist, watching how the device's glow intensified under the prism's influence. Evolution. Advancement. Like the corruption is an upgrade rather than damage. Perhaps from their perspective, it is. Wednesday held the prism at various angles, documenting how the Omnitrix responded. Evolution rarely distinguishes between beneficial and detrimental adaptations, merely what functions within a given environment. In a reality composed primarily of void energy, these adaptations would indeed represent advancement. A knock at the door interrupted their session. Enid entered without waiting for response, her normally vibrant appearance subdued. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her movements lacked their usual fluid grace, betraying tension in every line of her body. "Sorry to interrupt the mad science," she said with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Headmaster Weems wants to see Ben. Something about security protocols for tonight." Wednesday didn't look up from her measurements. "The full moon. Your control techniques are prepared." Enid's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "As ready as they'll ever be." Ben noted the exchange with interest. Though He'd learned that Enid was a werewolf during their first day at Nevermore, the practical implications hadn't been fully apparent until now. The subtle signs of pre-transformation stress were evident too. His experienced eye, the heightened awareness, the carefully controlled movements of someone fighting their own biology. "I'll come with you to see Weems," he offered, rising from his cross-legged position. Wednesday finally looked up, glancing between them with clinical assessment. "Your transformation cycles may interact in unpredictable ways. The Omnitrix responds to heightened emotional states. Lycanthropic pheromones could potentially accelerate the corruption. I can handle it," Ben stated with quiet confidence, the same tone he'd used countless times when facing unknown alien threats or cosmic catastrophes. Wednesday studied him for a moment longer before returning to her notes. "Your funeral, potentially literally." As they departed the research sanctum, Enid maintained a careful distance between them. Her heightened senses clearly aware of whatever changes Wednesday had detected. The morning corridors of Nevermore were less crowded than usual, many students already preparing for the full moon's effects on various supernatural conditions. "Sorry about Wednesday," Enid said after they'd put some distance between themselves and the East Tower. "She means well, in her own morbid way. I've dealt with worse bedside manner," Ben replied, thinking of Azimuth's characteristic gruffness. "Her research methods are unconventional, but effective." Enid glanced at him with something between amusement and concern. "You two have gotten close pretty quickly." Should I be worried about Wednesday collecting your organs for her specimen jars? Only if my spleen starts acting up. Ben matched her lighter tone, recognizing her attempt to maintain normalcy despite her obvious discomfort. What happens during full moons here? I'm guessing it's more involved than just werewolves. Nevermore goes into modified lockdown, Enid explained as they descended the grand staircase toward the administrative wing. Werewolves have designated transformation spaces, reinforced chambers for those with control issues. The Western Forest for those of us who can maintain awareness during the change. Vampires experience bloodlust intensification. Various lunar-sensitive entities undergo biological cycles. Even the architecture responds. Certain passageways only open during the full moon. And you? Ben asked, careful to keep his tone neutral rather than concerned. He'd learned CKLY that Enid prided herself on control and capability. Her stride faltered almost imperceptibly. I've been transforming since I was 13. Got the control part down years ago. The confidence in her voice sounded rehearsed. Usually I run with a few others who maintain consciousness through the change. Tonight, she hesitated. Tonight might be different. There've been incidents along the western boundary. Headmaster Weems has restricted transformation zones to secure areas only. They arrived at the imposing doors of Headmaster Weems' office before Ben could inquire further about these incidents. The doors swung open of their own accord, revealing the headmaster in conversation with a severe-looking woman Ben hadn't encountered before. The stranger turned as they entered, tall and angular with silver-white hair cropped military short and eyes so pale they appeared nearly colorless. She wore tactical gear rather than academic attire, all blacks and grays with multiple weapons visible in specialized holsters. Most striking was a network of scars visible along her neck and jawline, marks that appeared to have been made by claws or fangs. Mr. Tennyson, Miss Sinclair, Ms. acknowledged their arrival with a nod. Allow me to introduce Marshal Venetrix. She's arrived to assist with our boundary security during tonight's lunar event. The woman assessed Ben with cold efficiency, her gaze lingering on the Omnitrix. So this is the dimensional anomaly. Her voice carried the flat affect of someone who had trained emotion out of their speech patterns. The resonance C.G. nature is consistent with Class 4 breach entities. Containment protocols should be initiated immediately. Marshal Venetrix represents the Paranormal Containment Bureau, Weems explained, her tone carefully neutral. A government agency that occasionally assists Nevermore with security concerns. Ben recognized a sanitized introduction when he heard one. The tension in the room suggested a more complicated relationship between the Academy and this bureau. Dimensional incursions have increased 317% in the past month, Venetrix continued, her attention now fixed on Enid. Particular RLY during lunar transition periods when boundaries naturally thin. Your students have been encountering entities beyond standard containment parameters. Our security protocols have been sufficient. Weems replied with the practiced patience of someone who had navigated this conversation before. 3 students missing in 6 weeks suggests otherwise. Venetrix's tone remained flat despite the accusatory content. She returned her attention to Ben. The device on your wrist matches energy signatures from multiple breach points. It requires proper containment and study. Ben met her gaze without flinching. Years of dealing with authoritarian figures, from hostile aliens to government agencies in his own dimension, had taught him to project confident composure. The Omnitrix is securely bonded to my biological matrix. Removal would be problematic. All problems have solutions, Venetrix responded, her hand moving almost unconsciously toward one of her specialized weapons. Some more permanent than others. Marshal Venetrix and her team will be patrolling Nevermore's boundaries during tonight's lunar event, Weems interjected smoothly, stepping between them with subtle authority. Mr. Tennyson, given your device's unique capabilities, I believe you could provide valuable assistance in monitoring dimensional stability from within our secure perimeter. The strategic reassignment wasn't subtle, but effectively removed Ben from Venetrix's immediate reach while maintaining the appearance of cooperation. Of course, Ben agreed, recognizing the headmaster's maneuvering. Quote, I've been working with Wednesday Addams to map how the Omnitrix responds to dimensional fluctuations. We could expand that research to include lunar effects. The Addams girl, Venetrix's expression tightened fractionally. Another security concern. Her psychic abilities have expanded beyond established parameters. Miss Adams' abilities fall well within Nevermore's acceptable range for student safety. Weems countered with practiced diplomacy. Venetrix didn't press the issue, but her assessment of both Ben and Enid continued with predatory focus. Miss Sinclair, your family's pack has high, historically maintained transformation discipline. I expect similar control from you despite recent complications. Enid's posture stiffened, but her expression remained carefully neutral. My transformation protocols are fully prepared. Marshal, see that they remain so. Venetrix turned back to Weems. My team will establish perimeter checkpoints at sunset. All students should be in designated secure areas by moonrise. Any transformational entities found outside containment will be processed according to Bureau protocols. The threat lingered in the air as Venetrix departed, boots ing against stone floors with military precision. When the door closed behind her, Weems' composed expression gave way to momentary concern. The Bureau's involvement complicates matters. Marshal Trix has pursued aggressive containment policies against dimensional anomalies for years. Your arrival, Mr. Tennyson, particularly with that device, represents exactly the kind of situation she's built her career around containing. Containing or eliminating? Ben asked, recognizing the euphemisms of someone who viewed supernatural entities as threats rather than people. The distinction often blurs in Bureau operations. Weems admitted, which is why tonight's lunar protocols are critically important. Both of you must remain within designated safe zones. The consequences of encountering agents during active operations can be severe. Ben processed this new information, calculating potential threats and responses. How much authority does Venetrix have here? Officially, she operates under cooperative jurisdiction. Nevermore maintains primary authority within our boundaries, while the Bureau oversees external perimeters. Weems' expression suggested the reality was more complicated. Practically speaking, once her agents are deployed, incidents tend to be resolved according to Bureau methodologies regardless of territorial considerations. They shoot first and classify the remains later. Enid translated bluntly. My cousin encountered them during a transformation 3 years ago. He survived, technically, but spent 6 months in Bureau rehabilitation before they determined he wasn't a threat. Which brings us to tonight's arrangements, Weems continued. Miss Sinclair, you'll use the secure transformation chamber in the North Tower rather than your usual forest run. Mr. Tennyson, you'll assist Professor Thornhill in monitoring dimensional stability from the observatory. Your device's sensitivity to fluctuations could provide valuable early warning of potential breaches. Neither assignment was coincidental, Ben recognized. Weems was keeping both of them away from Venetrix's operations while maintaining their involvement in Nevermore's security efforts. What about Wednesday and Gwen? He asked. Miss Adams will be conducting her usual lunar observations from the Eastern Tower, sufficiently removed from Bureau activity while maintaining her research protocols. Miss Blackwood has been assigned to the Dimensional Cartography Laboratory, mapping potential weak points. Weems rose from behind her desk, indicating the meeting was concluding. I suggest you both prepare for tonight's activities. Lunar influence is already affecting sensitive individuals throughout the academy. As they departed the headmaster's office, Ben noticed Enid's increasing tension, subtle signs that would be invisible to most observers but stood out to his experienced eye. Slightly elevated breathing, careful control over movements that wanted to be either too quick or too forceful. Heightened awareness of environmental stimuli. The secure transformation chamber, he said once they were alone in the corridor. Is it actually secure, or just a cage? Enid's smile held little humor. 6-inch reinforced walls, silver-infused restraint systems, observation equipment that makes sure I don't eat anyone important. Very humane, as prisons go. You don't usually use it. I don't usually need it. She ran a hand through her pink-streaked hair, a gesture that seemed both frustrated and self-soothing. My control's always been good, one of the benefits of Sinclair genetics. But lately, she hesitated. The transformations are getting harder to control, Ben guessed. Enid nodded reluctantly. Started about 2 months ago. More animal instinct, less human consciousness during the change. My family thinks it's just a phase, hormonal adjustment or something. But it feels different, deeper. The correlation with increased dimensional activity wasn't lost on Ben. 2 months of intensifying werewolf symptoms, 2 months of dimensional incursions, now culminating in his arrival with the corrupted Noctrix. "Is there anything I can do to help?" he offered. Enid's expression softened momentarily, vulnerability breaking through her carefully maintained composure. "Just, maybe check on me. After. The isolation chamber does its job, but comin' back to yourself alone in a reinforced cell is." She trailed off, unable to articulate the particular loneliness of that experience. "I'll be there," Ben promised without hesitation. Her smile was genuine this time, if fleeting. "Thanks. I should probably go prepare." Pre-transformation meditation helps maintain consciousness through the change. As she turned to leave, Ben noticed something he hadn't before: a thin silver chain around her neck, partially hidden beneath her colorful shirt. The glimpse was brief, but he recognized a protective charm similar to those he'd seen Wednesday were king with during their research sessions. The Noctrix pulsed against his wrist, suddenly warmer than usual. Ben glanced down to find the symbols across its surface rearranging themselves into new patterns, responding either to his concern for Enid or to the approaching lunar influence. With hours remaining before moonrise, Ben sought out Gwen Blackwood in the Dimensional Cartography Laboratory, a chamber whose architecture defied conventional spatial relationships, corners meeting at impossible angles and doorways occasionally opening onto completely different locations depending on how one approached them. Gwen bent over a 3-dimensional map of Nevermore's grounds, holographic overlays showing energy patterns that flowed beneath the physical structures like luminescent rivers. Her fingers manipulated control surfaces with practiced precision, adjusting parameters to account for the approaching lunar alignment. "The Bureau's involvement changes things," Ben said without preamble. Having confirmed they were alone in the laboratory, Gwen didn't look up from her work, but her posture indicated she'd been expecting this conversation. "Marshal Venetrix has pursued my grandfather's research for years. Her interest in dimensional boundaries isn't purely security-oriented. You've encountered her before." "My family has." Gwen finally looked up, her expression guarded. "The Bureau confiscated most of my grandfather's research following the Rotterdam incident. What they couldn't understand, they classified as dangerous. What they could understand, they weaponized. And now she's here, just as dimensional activity peaks and the Noctrix is showing increased integration." Ben studied the holographic map, noting how energy concentrations pulsed more intensely around certain structures. "That's not coincidence." Quote, "Coincidence is statistically improbable where dimensional nexus points are concerned," Gwen agreed, adjusting the map to show historical breach points. "These locations have experienced periodic dimensional thinning for centuries, but the frequency has increased exponentially over the past 60 days. Tonight's lunar alignment creates optimal conditions for a major breach." Ben examined the pattern of historical incursions, recognizing a geometric configuration that matched symbols occasionally displayed on the Noctrix's surface. "They're forming a containment circle. These aren't random breach attempts, they're systematic tests of Nevermore's dimensional barriers." "Precisely." Gwen overlaid a new data set showing energy readings from the Noctrix during Ben's controlled transformations. "And your device's energy signature matches these breach points with 98.7% correlation. The Void Walkers aren't just targeting Nevermore, they're specifically calibrated to the Noctrix's frequency." Quote, "But the Omnitrix didn't even exist in this dimension until I arrived," Ben pointed out. "How could they be calibrated to something that wasn't here?" Gwen's expression grew more serious. "Unless they arranged for your arrival in the first place." The implication hung in the air between them. Ben had assumed his dimensional displacement was accidental, a consequence of the battle with the interdimensional entity. But what if it had been deliberate? What if the corruption of the Omnitrix was not collateral damage but the primary objective? "You've been monitoring me since I arrived," Ben stated rather than asked. "Not just out of scientific curiosity." Gwen didn't deny it. "My family has studied dimensional boundaries for generations. When your energy signature appeared on our monitors, it matched theoretical models my grandfather developed for what he called a dimensional keystone, a technological catalyst capable of synchronized breach activation. The key to the convergence." Ben translated, remembering the entity's communications. I didn't know what form the keystone would take, Gwen admitted. The Blackwood hypothesis suggested it would be an artifact or device, not a transformation system bonded to a human host. Your arrival complicated all our models. And you didn't share this with Wednesday or Enid. I needed to confirm my theories before raising alarms. She manipulated the holographic display again, zooming in on the Noctrix's energy patterns. The data suggests your device isn't merely corrupted, it's being reconfigured for a specific purpose. The transformations aren't random mutations but precisely engineered adaptations designed to interact with our dimensional boundaries. Ben absorbed this information, fitting it into the expanding puzzle of his situation. So the Void Walkers engineered my arrival, corrupted the Omnitrix into the Noctrix, and are now attempting to use it to trigger the convergence. He examined the map again, focusing on the pattern of breach points. But they need me to be in a specific location at a specific time, with the Noctrix activated in a specific way. Tonight's lunar alignment creates perfect conditions, Gwen confirmed. Maximum dimensional thinning across all identified weak points simultaneously. If you were positioned at the central nexus point during a transformation. She didn't need to complete the thought. Where's the central nexus point? Ben asked, already suspecting the answer. Gwen manipulated the map one last time, expanding the view to show the entire Academy grounds. Energy lines converged beneath a structure set apart from the main buildings, a circular stone chamber positioned precisely at the center of the geometric pattern formed by previous breach attempts. The North Tower Transformation Chamber, Ben identified, a chill running through him. Where Enid is scheduled to undergo her change tonight. The location's no accident, Gwen concluded grimly. Lycanthropic transformation energy naturally amplifies dimensional resonance. Combined with the Noctrix at peak integration. We need to warn Weems, Ben decided, already turning toward the exit. Wait, Gwen caught his arm, her expression deadly serious. The Bureau monitors all communication within Nevermore during operational periods. If Venatrix learns about this connection, she won't just secure the boundaries, she'll implement full containment protocols on both you and Enid. What exactly does that mean? Ben asked, though he suspected he already knew. It means you'd disappear into a Bureau research facility, Gwen stated bluntly. And anything connected to the Noctrix would be neutralized as a potential threat. Including Enid. Ben processed this with the rapid tactical assessment he'd developed through years of hero work. Venatrix represented a threat potentially as dangerous as the Void Walkers, just operating under different parameters. Weems was attempting to maintain balance between Academy security and Bureau intervention. Meanwhile, the lunar timeline continued advancing toward optimal breach conditions. We need Wednesday, he decided. Her psychic abilities might let us communicate without Bureau monitoring, and her occult knowledge could help us develop countermeasures. Gwen nodded agreement, already gathering essential equipment. The Eastern Tower is warded against electronic surveillance. If we move now, we can reach her before Bureau operatives complete their perimeter setup. They navigated Nevermore's increasingly active corridors, where preparations for the full moon were well underway. Security personnel, distinguished from regular faculty by their silver-embossed uniforms, directed students toward designated safe zones according to their supernatural classifications. Younger werewolves were already being escorted to secured transformation chambers, while vampiric students received specialized UVP protection for the night's intensified lunar energies. Ben noticed Bureau operatives integrating into Nevermore's security operations, distinguished by their tactical gear and the subtle electromagnetic signatures of advanced weapons designed for supernatural containment. Their presence created visible tension among students and faculty alike. Wednesday's research sanctum in the Eastern Tower Rima, eerily calm amid the growing activity. They found her surrounded by arcane instruments arranged in precise geometric patterns, silver pendulums suspended above maps marked with astronomical calculations. She acknowledged their arrival without looking up from her work. Lunar ascension in approximately 4 hours, 17 minutes. The dimensional thinning has already begun. You know, Ben observed, unsurprised by her awareness. Obviously, Wednesday adjusted a crystal sphere filled with swirling black liquid. The convergence of Bureau operatives, intensified lycanthropic symptoms, and accelerated Noctrix integration creates a predictable scenario. The North Tower Transformation Chamber sits at the precise center of Nevermore's dimensional nexus. Elementary deduction. Why didn't you say something earlier? Gwen demanded, professional rivalry momentarily overshadowing their shared concern. Wednesday finally looked up, dark eyes unreadable. Information flows according to necessary patterns. Had I revealed my awareness prematurely, certain defensive preparations would have been compromised. She gestured to the complex arrangement of occult instruments surrounding her. These wards require precise calibration to counteract dimensional thinning. Interruption would have reset the entire process. Ben intervened before the academic tension between the two young women could escalate further. We need to get Enid out of the North Tower before moonrise. If the Void Walkers are targeting that location specifically, relocation is impossible, Wednesday interrupted. Bureau operatives have already implemented containment protocols around all transformation chambers. Enid Sinclair is under direct surveillance as a Class 3 entity with recent control aberrations. How do you know that? Gwen asked suspiciously. Wednesday pointed to a small crystal ball on her desk, within which swirled miniature images of various Academy locations. Psychic Surveillance Network, a family technique my mother refined for monitoring potential murder attempts by disgruntled relatives. Ben examined the surveillance images, noting Bureau operatives positioned throughout Nevermore's grounds with particular concentration around the North Tower. So we can't extract Enid without triggering Bureau intervention, which would likely make things worse. Correct, Wednesday confirmed. However, the central problem isn't Enid's location but the Noctrix's proximity to the nexus point during lunar alignment. Keep the device away from the transformation chamber, and the dimensional catalyst remains incomplete regardless of lycanthropic energy production. Except the Void Walkers will be attempting to herd Ben exactly where they want him, Gwen pointed out. And they demonstrated considerable ability to manipulate dimensional space already. Wednesday nodded almost approvingly at Gwen's analysis. Which is why we require a multi-layered counter-strategy. Psychic monitoring, occult warding, and scientific containment operating in synchronized deployment. The unlikely alliance between Wednesday's occult methodology, Gwen's scientific approach, and Ben's pro-cetical experience with transformation technology created a unique opportunity for effective countermeasures. Over the next 2 hours, they developed a comprehensive strategy built around keeping the Omnitrix away from the nexus point while monitoring both Enid's transformation and potential dimensional breaches. Wednesday adapted her psychic monitoring instruments to track Bureau movements while Gwen calculated optimal positioning for scientific countermeasures around potential breach points. Ben examined the Noctrix's current state, noting increased integration with his biological systems as lunar influence intensified. The midnight blue veins now extended past his elbow, creating intricate patterns beneath his skin that pulsed in rhythm with the device itself. The corruption's progress on had accelerated just as Wednesday predicted, responding to the approaching full moon. The integration rate has increased by 46% in the past hour, Wednesday observed, measuring the veins' progress. Scion with calipers that occasionally sparked with silver energy. At this rate, complete biological synthesis will occur within 7 days rather than 17. And then what happens? Gwen asked the question Ben had posed earlier. Wednesday's expression remained clinical. Historical precedents suggest complete transformation into an entity capable of existing across multiple dimensional planes simultaneously. Essentially, Ben would become a living dimensional gateway, the physical embodiment of what the Void Walkers call the key. Can it be reversed? Ben asked directly. Wednesday and Gwen exchanged glances. A rare moment of unified concern between the academic rivals. Unknown, Gwen finally admitted. My grandfather's research suggested dimensional integration follows a one-way entropic pattern. Once certain thresholds are crossed, reversal becomes theoretically impossible. Theory remains malleable until proven otherwise, Wednesday countered, though without her usual competitive edge toward Gwen. The Addams family grimoire contains accounts of dimensional separation rituals, though survival rates are statistically unfavorable. Ben absorbed this information with outward calm. Years of facing world-ending threats having taught him to compartmentalize existential concerns during tactical planning. So we focus on preventing the integration from reaching critical threshold, starting by keeping the Noctrix away from the nexus point tonight. As twilight approached, they finalized their countermeasures. Wednesday prepared protective amulets designed to SRUPT dimensional thinning around the wearer. Gwen programmed small devices that would create localized stable fields through quantum entanglement. Ben tested the Omnitrix's current transformation capabilities, confirming which alien forms remained accessible despite the corruption. XLR-8 has been corrupted into something the Omnitrix identifies as phantom velocity, he reported after examining the transformation roster. Ghost Freak Umbra and Heatblast Infernal we already know about. There are others, but their forms are still shifting, not fully defined yet. The corruption appears to be prioritizing transformations with dimensional manipulation potential, Gwen observed, examining the energy readings from the Omnitrix. Essentially upgrading your alien roster for interdimensional functionality. Like a software update with very specific objectives, Ben agreed grimly. As darkness fell over Nevermore Academy, they implemented their plan. Wednesday would maintain psychic surveillance from her eastern tower, monitoring both Bureau operations and dimensional fluctuations through her occult instruments. Gwen would position herself in the Dimensional Cartography Laboratory, tracking G-energy patterns and coordinating their response to any breach attempts. Ben would patrol the Academy grounds, maintaining distance from the North Tower while remaining mobile enough to respond to emerging threats. The protective amulet will shield the Omnitrix's energy signature from Bureau scanners, Wednesday explained as she placed a silver medallion around Ben's neck. It won't prevent Tran's formation but should mask the dimensional resonance enough to avoid detection. My monitoring devices will alert all of us if breach energy exceeds containment parameters, Gwen added, providing all communicators designed to function through quantum entanglement rather than conventional signals that the Bureau might monitor. As they prepared to separate for their assigned positions, Wednesday fixed Ben with an uncharacteristically direct gaze. Enid's transformation will be difficult tonight. The lunar alignment intensifies lycanthropic responses, and her recent control issues suggest deeper metaphysical disruption. Her consciousness may become submerged beneath instinctual drives. I promised I'd check on her after moonset, Ben replied, understanding Wednesday's concern despite her clinical phrasing. Emotional connections create metaphysical tethers, Wednesday continued, her tone scientific despite the almost personal nature of her observation. Your presence may help or her human consciousness during reversion. Ben recognized this as Wednesday's way of expressing concern for their friend without abandoning her detached persona. I'll be there for her. With final preparations complete, they departed the eastern tower to their respective positions. Darkness had fully claimed Nevermore's grounds, the rising moon already visible through gathering clouds that seemed unnaturally luminescent. Bureau operatives patrolled in precise patterns, their specialized equipment occasionally emitting pulses of energy that mapped supernatural activity throughout the Academy. Ben moved through shadowed pathways with practiced stealth, years of hero work having taught him to navigate hostile territory undetected. The Omnitrix pulsed against his wrist with increasing warmth, responding to the rising moon with subtle vibrations that traveled through the midnight blue veins spreading beneath his skin. From his position near the western courtyard, Ben observed Bureau operatives establishing what appeared to be containment equipment around major structures, devices that generated energy fields calibrated to prevent dimensional breaches. Marshal Venetrix directed rations from a mobile command center established near the main entrance, her movements precise and her expression vigilant. The quantum entanglement communicator provided by Gwen activated with a subtle vibration against his wrist. Dimensional thinning accelerating across all monitored points, her voice reported without electronic distortion. Energy convergence forming exactly as predicted. E-Nexus point beneath the North Tower is showing 78% increased permeability. Bureau deployment patterns suggest awareness of potential breach locations, Wednesday's voice added through the same connection. However, their containment protocols appear standardized rather than specifically calibrated to void walker energy signatures. Ben continued his careful circuit of Nevermore's grounds, maintaining maximum distance from the North Tower while positioning himself to respond to potential incursions. The moon climbed higher, its light intensifying as clouds periodically revealed its full face. Throughout the Academy, he could sense transformations occurring. Werewolves shifting forms in secure chambers, vampiric students experiencing heightened abilities, various supernatural entities responding to lunar influence according to their nature. The Omnitrix seemed to resonate with these transformations, pulses synchronizing with the waves of supernatural energy flowing through Nevermore's ancient stones. "Something's happening." Gwen's voice came through the communicator with sudden urgency. "Energy readings from the North Tower are spiking beyond predicted parameters. Enid's transformation is generating unusual resonance patterns." Ben changed direction immediately, moving toward the North Tower while maintaining caution against Bureau detection. "Define unusual." Her lycanthropic energy signature is interacting with the dimensional nexus point, Gwen explained, concern evident in her typically scientific tone. "It's as if something is amplifying the connection beyond normal transformation parameters. The Void Walkers are using her as a catalyst even without the Omnitrix present," Wednesday deduced. "Clever. They've adapted their approach to work with available resources." Ben quickened his pace, weighing tactical options against increasing danger. If the Void Walkers were somehow influencing Enid's transformation to create a dimensional breach, her safety was compromised regardless of Bureau containment protocols. "I'm going to check on her," he decided, already moving with purpose toward the North Tower. "Bureau operatives are concentrated around all access points," Wednesday warned. "Direct approach will result in immediate containment response." "Then I won't use a direct approach." Ben accessed the Omnitrix's transformation controls, cycling through available forms. XLR-8 Phantom should provide enough speed to bypass security without detection. Before either Gwen or Wednesday could object, Ben activated the transformation. Midnight blue energy engulfed him as the Omnitrix executed its corrupted programming. The familiar sensation of molecular restructuring followed, but with the now expected variations that characterized his new forms. Where XLR-8 had been a velociraptor-like alien built for speed, Phantom Velocity manifested as something more ethereal. His form elongated, limbs thinning to almost skeletal proportions while retaining incredible strength. Skin transformed into a midnight blue membrane that seemed to exist partially out of phase with conventional matter. The helmet that normally protected XLR-8's head became an closed visor through which Ben perceived the world not just visually but across multiple spectral ranges simultaneously. Most significantly, Phantom Velocity didn't merely move quickly, it phased between moments. Existing in the microsecond gaps between conventional time, each step carried him not just through space but through fractional dimensional boundaries, allowing him to pass through solid objects by briefly shifting into adjacent dimensional planes. "Transformation successful," Ben reported, his voice emerging as a whisper that seemed to arrive before it was spoken. Proceeding to North Tower. Moving in this form was unlike anything Ben had experienced before. Conventional XLR-8 speed felt linear and physical: acceleration, momentum, impact. Phantom Velocity operated on different principles entirely, slipping between moments of conventional reality like a shadow passing through light. Bureau operatives remained completely unaware of his passage, their specialized sensors braided for energy signatures that operated within conventional dimensional parameters. Phantom Velocity existed just slightly offset from those parameters, visible to normal perception only as a momentary blur that registered more as imagination than observation. The North Tower loomed before him, its ancient stones humming with energy that his enhanced perception revealed as flowing in precise geometric patterns. Bureau containment equipment surrounded the structure, generating fields designed to prevent supernatural entities from entering or exiting without authorization. Ben phased through these barriers effortlessly, his corrupted form temporarily existing in dimensional spaces the Bureau's technology couldn't detect or contain. Inside the tower, he ascended rapidly toward the transformation chamber where Enid had been secured for the night. The chamber itself was surrounded by additional security measures: silver-infused barriers, runic containment circles, and monitoring equipment that recorded both physical and metaphysical activity within. Through the small observation window in the reinforced door, Ben could see what was happening inside. Enid's transformation had progressed beyond conventional lycanthropy. Where werewolves typically maintained some recognizable features of their human forms, her lupine manifestation had evolved into something more primordial. Midney GHT black fur covered a form that stood nearly 8 feet tall, with elongated limbs that suggested both wolf and something older, something that had existed in the spaces between early evolution. Most striking were her eyes, No longer the amber typical of transformed werewolves but swirling pools of silver-blue energy that matched the dimensional resonance patterns Ben had observed at breach points. She moved with unnatural grace within the containment chamber, testing barriers not with the frustrated rage of a contained werewolf but with methodical precision, as if mapping weaknesses according to some larger design. Occasionally, her form seemed to flicker, momentarily transparent before reconsolidating with subtle variations in physical structure. "I've reached the transformation chamber," Ben reported through the quantum communicator. "Enid's condition is different. This isn't standard lycanthropy. Sensor readings confirm dimensional contamination." Gwen's voice responded immediately. "Her transformation energy is being channeled directly into the nexus point. They're using her to create a breach from inside Nevermore's defenses." "Can you disrupt the connection?" Ben asked, evaluating options for intervention. "Not remotely," Wednesday answered. "The dimensional tethering would require direct countermeasures applied to both Enid and the nexus point simultaneously." Ben made his decision instantly. "I'm going in. The Omnitrix in proximity to an active nexus point is exactly what the Void Walkers want," Gwen objected. "You'd be completing their catalyst configuration. If I do nothing, they use Enid to create a breach anyway," Ben countered. "At least this way I control the variables." Without waiting for further discussion, Ben phased through the rain. Forced door into the transformation chamber. Enid's altered werewolf form sensed his presence immediately, silver blue eyes fixing on him with predatory focus. Ben allowed the phantom velocity transformation to dissolve, returning to human form while maintaining ready access to the Omnitrix's controls. The protective amulet Wednesday had provided pulsed against his chest, generating a field that artially disrupted the dimensional energy flowing through the chamber. "Enid," he addressed her directly, maintaining calm confidence in his voice. "I know you're in there. Whatever's influencing your transformation, you can fight it." The werewolf form tilted its head, a gesture unnervingly reminiscent of human consideration despite its monstrous appearance. When it spoke, the voice emerged as harmonics layered over conventional sound, Enid's voice beneath something older and vastly more alien. "The vessel arrives. The key approaches activation. You're using her," Ben realized, addressing the entity speaking through Enid's transformed state, contaminating her lycanthropic transformation to create a dimensional anchor. All life serves the convergence. The wolf child's nature bridge. Realities even without conscious participation. Ben approached carefully, noting how the chamber's silver-infused restraint systems had been subtly altered, runes partially erased and redrawn with different configurations. Energy fields redirected to amplify rather than contain supernatural manifestation. "I won't let you use her," Ben stated firmly, the Omnitrix pulsing in response to his emotional intensity. "Whatever the convergence is, whatever you're trying to accomplish, it doesn't justify hijacking someone else's mind and body. Morality is dimensional. Your perspective is limited by three-dimensional ethics. The convergence transcends all limitations." The werewolf form moved with sudden speed, crossing the chamber in a blur of midnight fur and extended claws. Ben reacted instinctively, the Omnitrix activating in response to perceived threat. Transformation energy engulfed him just as Enid's corrupted form made contact. The resulting collision of energies, Omnitrix transfo. Armation combined with contaminated lycanthropic power directly above a dimensional nexus point, created exactly the catalyst configuration the Void Walkers had engineered. Reality fractured within the containment chamber, dimensional boundaries thinning to transparency as the nexus point beneath them activated fully. Ben's transformation completed into Diamondhead Obsidian, a corrupted version of His crystalline form now composed of black volcanic glass shot through with veins of midnight blue energy. The form's natural defensive capabilities immediately generated crystalline barriers around himself and Enid as the chamber filled with swirling dimensional energy. Through the fracturing reality around them, shadows began to materialize, Void Walkers emerging through weakened dimensional boundaries with methodical purpose. Their familiar silhouette forms converged toward the center of the chamber where the nexus energy flowed most intensely. The catalyst activates. The convergence commences. Ben fought to maintain both his transformed state's stability and control over the rapidly deteriorating situation. Diamondhead Obsidian possessed enhanced crystalline manipulation compar. Ed to the original form, able to generate structures that existed partially in adjacent dimensional spaces, creating barriers effective against entities that phased between realities. Enid, he called to the werewolf, whose form now fluctuated more rapidly between solid manifestation and partial transparency. Focus on my voice. Find your consciousness. The silver blue eyes fixed on him, airily flickering to their natural amber before returning to the contaminated state. A struggle was clearly occurring within her transformed consciousness, Enid fighting to reassert control against whatever entity had hijacked her lycanthropic form. Ben expanded his crystalline barriers to encompass the entire chamber, creating a geometric structure that mirrored the protection symbols he'd observed in Wednesday's occult diagrams. The Void Walkers collided with these barriers, testing their dimensional properties with the same methodical precision they'd demonstrated in previous encounters. Quantum communicator activated against his crystalline wrist. Catastrophic breach in progress, Gwen's voice reported urgently. Bureau sensors have detected the energy spike. Containment teams converging on your position. Wednesday. Ben responded, maintaining focus on his crystalline barriers while addressing the psychic member of their team. If you can hear me, I need you to help Enid. Void Walkers have contaminated her transformation, using her as part of the catalyst. She's fighting it, but needs help reconnecting with her human consciousness. For several seconds, only static responded. Then Wednesday's voice emerged, strained in a way Ben had never heard before, suggesting significant exertion of her psychic abilities. Establishing connection. Her consciousness is fragmented across multiple dimensional planes. The contamination has dispersed her sense of self to prevent resistance. Ben understood immediately what needed to happen. Can you help me reach her? Create a psychic bridge. Theoretically possible, practically dangerous. The connection would expose your consciousness to the same contamination affecting her. Do it, Ben decided without hesitation. The Omnitrix gives me experience with consciousness transfer between forms. I can handle the exposure. The next moments unfolded across multiple planes of awareness simultaneously. While physically maintaining his crystalline barriers against advancing Void Walkers, Ben felt Wednesday's psychic presence establish connection between his consciousness and Enid's fragmented awareness. The sensatio resembled the mental state he experienced during transformation. Identity stretched across different configurations of existence, but with another mind entwined with his own. Enid's consciousness stead as scattered fragments across dimensional spaces, memories, emotions, core personality traits dispersed to prevent cohesive resistance against the contamination. The entity using her transformed Tate had calculated that a werewolf's natural division between human and wolf consciousness made them particularly vulnerable to this form of dimensional hijacking. But the entity hadn't accounted for Ben's unique experience with transformed states of being, nor Wednesday's exceptional psychic abilities evolved specifically for navigating death-related dimensional boundaries. Together, they created a framework within which Enid's fragmented self could reconnect. Enid, Ben called through the psychic connection, projecting not just her name but the essence of how he perceived her strength, her protective nature. Her determined optimism even in difficult circumstances. Find yourself. Remember who you are. Wednesday's psychic presence added structure to this call, creating pathways through which scattered consciousness could travel back toward cohesion. Her contribution felt clinically precise yet surprisingly compassionate, the framework of a mind accustomed to categorizing darkness while maintaining fundamental humanity. Within the shared mental space, fragments of Enid began to coalesce, memories of family transformations under full moons, fierce protection of younger supernatural students. The particular pride in controlling her wolf nature rather than being controlled by it. Each reconnected fragment strengthened her core self, pushing back against the dimensional contamination. Physically, the werewolf form in the containment chamber began to change, the unnatural proportions shifting back toward conventional lycanthropic structure, silver blue eyes flickering more frequently to natural amber. The Void Walkers sensed this shift, their attacks against Ben's crystalline barriers intensifying as they attempted to maintain control over their chosen catalyst. Resistance is temporary. The convergence is inevitable. Nothing's inevitable, Ben countered, channeling Diamondhead Obsidian's energy into creating crystalline structures that disrupted the dimensional flow feeding the breach. especially not cosmic destruction by shadow monsters with delusions of grandeur. The psychic connection strengthened as Enid's consciousness regained cohesion. Ben felt her recognition, her gratitude. And beneath those conscious responses, a deeper emotional resonance he hadn't anticipated, trust evolving towards something more complex. The containment chamber's door exploded inward. Bureau operatives flooding the space with weapons drawn. Marshal Venetrix led the team, her specialized containment device already charging with energy designed to neutralize supernatural threats. Subject containment protocol initiated, she announced with cold efficiency. All entities will submit to immediate neutralization and processing. Ben had seconds to make a tactical decision. The Bureau represented one threat, the Void Walkers another. Enid's transformation remained unstable despite their progress in helping her regain control. The dimensional breach continued expanding beneath them, fueled by the Nexus Point's activation. He chose the option that addressed all threats simultaneously. Wednesday. Gwen, full countermeasures now. He commanded through the quantum communicator. Throughout Nevermore Academy, carefully positioned occult wards and scientific countermeasures activated in synchronized sequence. Wednesday's network of silver pendulums began oscillating at precisely calculated frequencies, generating metaphysical interference patterns across dimensional boundaries. Gwen's quantum entanglement devices created localized stability fields that reinforced conventional reality against incursion. Ben channeled Diamondhead Obsidian's energy into the crystalline structure surrounding himself and Enid, creating a resonance pattern that amplified these countermeasures within the containment chamber. The combined effect disrupted both the dimensional breach and the Bureau's containment technology, which relied on similar principles of energy manipulation. Marshal Venetrix's weapon discharged harmlessly against the crystalline barrier, its energy absorbed and redirected into the counterresonance pattern. The Void Walkers, more vulnerable to the specifically calibrated countermeasures, began losing cohesion as dimensional boundaries reasserted themselves. Breach collapse imminent, Gwen's voice reported through the communicator. Dimensional rebound in 5 seconds. Ben expanded his crystalline protection around Enid's werewolf form completely, creating a shared space isolated from both the collapsing breach and the Bureau's containment efforts. The psychic connection Wednesday had established allowed him to communicate directly with Enid's increasingly coherent consciousness. Hold on to yourself, he instructed through the mental link. When the breach collapses, there'll be dimensional rebound. Focus on your core identity, who you are beneath the transformation. The dimensional energy that had filled the chamber suddenly contracted, reality snapping back into conventional alignment with enough force to throw Bureau operatives against walls and temporarily disrupt electrical systems throughout Nevermore. The Void Walkers were forced back through closing dimensional boundaries, their forms dissolving into shadow as conventional physics reasserted dominance. Within Ben's crystalline protection, Enid's werewolf form shuddered violently before stabilizing into a more natural lycanthropic state, still transformed, but now clearly her own consciousness in control rather than dimensional contamination. The silver-blue energy drained from her eyes, replaced by natural amber that fixed on Ben with clear recognition. The psychic connection thinned as dimensional normality returned, but not before Ben felt Enid's gratitude flowing through their shared mental space, a complex emotional signature that conveyed more than words could express. As the crystalline barrier dissolved, Ben allowed his transformation to revert, returning to human form while maintaining protective positioning between Enid and the disoriented Bureau operatives. Marshal Venetrix recovered quickly, her cold assessment taking in the angst situation with professional adaptation. Dimensional incursion contained, she noted clinically, though her expression suggested frustration rather than satisfaction. Subject status requires evaluation. Subject status is stable, came Headmaster Weems's authoritative voice from the doorway. She entered the chamber with unruffled composure despite the chaos surrounding her. Nevermore Academy maintains jurisdiction over student welfare regardless of Bureau containment protocols. Venetrix's expression tightened, but she didn't directly challenge Weems's authority. The dimensional signature from the male subject's device matches breach parameters exactly. Protocol requires immediate containment and study. The male subject, Weems countered smoothly, utilized his unique capabilities to prevent catastrophic breach expansion. Bureau monitoring confirmed dimensional collapse and restoration of boundary integrity. Your mission parameters have been successfully fulfilled. Political maneuvering between Academy authority and government agency played out in subtle conversational warfare, each leader asserting jurisdiction while maintaining the appearance of cooperation. Ben recognized the delicate balance Weems maintained, acknowledging Bureau authority over dimensional security while establishing firm boundaries around her students' well-being. Enid's werewolf form remained close to Ben. Her transformed state now clearly under her conscious control despite the full moon's continued influence. Though unable to speak in conventional language while transformed, her protective positioning communicated gratitude and determination to anyone observing. Containment teams will remain on site for the duration of the lunar event, Omnitrix finally conceded, though our attention remained fixed on the Omnitrix with barely concealed interest. All dimensional anomalies will be monitored continuously. As Bureau operatives established new containment equipment around the chamber's perimeter, Wednesday and Gwen arrived nearly simultaneously, one moving with ghost-like silence through shadowed corridors, the other with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to navigating crisis situations. Psychic contamination has been neutralized, Wednesday reported to Weems, her clinical tone belied by the unusual pallor of her normally composed features. Residual dim, tensional energy dissipating at expected rates. The breach has fully collapsed, Gwen added, displaying readings from her monitoring equipment. Dimensional boundaries have stabilized to 97% of pre-event integrity. Weems nodded acknowledgement of their reports before addressing all 4 students directly. The 4 of you will accompany me to my office immediately. Marshal Omnitrix, your teams may continue monitoring dimensional stability from established perimeter positions. The dismissal was polite but firm, establishing clear limits to Bureau authority within Nevermore's walls. Omnitrix accepted the boundary with professional detachment, though her gaze lingered on the Omnitrix as Ben passed. This isn't over, Mr. Tennyson, she stated quietly. Dimensional anomalies fall under Bureau jurisdiction regardless of educational circumstances. I look forward to discussing interdimensional legal frameworks at an appropriate time, Ben replied with the diplomatic precision he'd learned from countless alien negotiations. After the current lunar event concludes, of course. As they departed the containment chamber, Enid remained in her werewolf form but walked upright with clear human consciousness guiding her movements. The connection Wednesday had helped establish appeared to have strengthened her control over the transformation, allowing her to maintain identity despite the full moon's influence. The dimensional contamination attempted to exploit the natural division between human and wolf consciousness, Wednesday explained as they moved through corridors now heavy. Lee patrolled by both Academy security and Bureau operatives. Enid's improved control suggests the psychic bridge we created helped integrate those aspects more effectively. You mean I'm actually transforming better because of what happened? Enid asked, her werewolf form managing approximations of speech that emerged as growling undertones beneath recognizable words. Dimensional contaminatio. N operated on different principles than natural lycanthropic transformation, Gwen theorized. By fighting against external control, you may have established stronger neural pathways between your human consciousness and werewolf physiology. Quote, essentially, Ben translated with a slight smile, you kicked out the interdimensional squatters and took back full ownership of your supernatural real estate. Enid's werewolf features arranged themselves into what might have been a smile, disconcerting given the impressive dental arrangement involved, but genuinely appreciative of the simplified explanation. In Weems's office, they found the headmaster already reviewing holographic displays of the night's events, dimensional energy patterns, breach configurations, and countermeasure effectiveness. LL presented in overlapping data streams. She gestured for them to sit, conjuring appropriate seating that included a reinforced platform designed to accommodate Enid's transformed state. The Bureau's involvement complicated matters. Weems began without preamble, but also provided unexpected advantages. Their containment technology inadvertently strengthened certain aspects of our defensive parameters, while their presence forced our dimensional adversaries to adjust their approach in ways that revealed their methodology. They're adapting, Ben observed, using whatever resources or avenue available rather than requiring specific configurations. When they couldn't get the Omnitrix directly to the nexus point, they contaminated Enid's transformation to create an alternative catalyst. CH suggests fundamental flexibility in their approach to the convergence, Wednesday added. The specific mechanism matters less than the underlying dimensional principles. But they still need the Omnitrix for complete activation. Gwen concluded. Tonight's attempt failed because the contamination couldn't fully replicate the device's unique energy signature. Weems manipulated the holographic display to show the spreading midnight blue veins beneath Ben's skin, now extending nearly to his shoulder. The integration continues accelerating. At current progression rates, complete biological synthesis will occur within 5 days. And then, Ben asked directly, the historical pattern suggests transformation into an entity capable of existing simultaneously across multiple dimensional planes. Weems answered with careful precision. Whether consciousness remains intact during such transformation has never been documented, as no previous host survived long enough to provide testimony. The clinical description of his potential fate didn't surprise Ben. After years facing existential threats, personal risk assessment had become simply another tactical consideration. We need to understand exactly what the convergence entails, he decided, focusing on the larger threat rather than personal danger. Not just theoretically, but practically. What specifically are the Void Walkers trying to accomplish? And how does the Omnitrix factor into their plans? The Midnight section contains additional resources that may provide insights, Wednesday suggested. Specifically, the Arc Annum Dimensionum includes theoretical models of consciousness transfer across dimensional boundaries. My grandfather's research into dimensional resonance stabilization might offer countermeasure possibilities, Gwen added. Particularly regarding biological integration with technological catalysts. And I can provide practical experience with managing dual nature transformation, Enid contributed. Her werewolf voice carrying unexpected authority. What's happening to Ben isn't completely unlike what werewolves experience, balancing different aspects of self within one physical form. Ms. observed their collaborative problem solving with measured approval. Nevermore Academy has stood at this dimensional crossroads for centuries, protecting the boundaries between realities from those who would collapse them for power or knowledge. Each generation of students contributes to that legacy in unique ways. Her gaze settled on each of them in turn. Your particular combination of abilities and perspectives may prove decisive in addressing our current situation. The meeting continued well into the night, strategic planning interwoven with historical research and theoretical modeling. Enid maintained her transformed state with remarkable control, her werewolf form now fully aligned with her human consciousness rather than fighting against it. Wednesday occasionally lapsed into brief psychic trances, accessing information through means she declined to fully explain. Gwen developed increasingly complex models of dimensional energy patterns, identifying potential countermeasures against further breach attempts. And Ben, at the center of it all, felt the Omnitrix continuing its steady integration with his biological systems, midnight blue veins spreading beneath his skin, Arying whatever programming the Void Walkers had embedded within the corrupted device. The transformation felt simultaneously threatening and fascinating, his body becoming something new, something that existed between conventional definitions of human and alien, between dimensional boundaries themselves. As moonset approached, bringing the night's heightened dimensional activity to its natural conclusion, Ben found himself standing at one of the tower windows overlooking Nevermore's grounds. Bureau operatives continued their patrols, silver-enhanced equipment occasionally emitting pulses of energy that mapped supernatural activity throughout the academy. Wednesday joined him silently, her usual composure restored after the significant psychic exertion required to help Enid. For several moments, they observed the grounds together without speaking. The integration is changing you, she finally stated, her characteristic bluntness softened by what might have been genuine concern. Not just physically, your consciousness is evolving to accommodate multidimensional awareness. Ben nodded, having sensed the changes himself, moments of perception that extended beyond conventional senses. Awareness of dimensional layers normally invisible to human consciousness. Is that why you were able to establish the psychic bridge so effectively? Because my mind is already becoming something different. Partially. Wednesday turned to face him directly, her dark eyes studying him with clinical interest underlaid with something more personal. But there's another factor. Emotional conceptions create metaphysical tethers between consciousness structures. Your concern for Enid provided a framework for the psychic bridge to function. You make friendship sound so technical, Ben observed with a slight smile. Terminology provides comfortable distance from uncomfortable realities, Wednesday replied, a rare moment of self-awareness in her typically detached persona. The fact remains that your connections to Enid, to Gwen, to me, create metaphysical architecture that may prove essential to resolving your dimensional contamination. Ben recognized what Wednesday was truly saying beneath her clinical phrasing, that emotional bonds might provide anchors for his human consciousness as the Noctrix's integration progressed. That friendship, perhaps something deeper, could be what preserved his identity against the void. I've faced world-ending threats before, he told her, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had repeatedly confronted impossible odds. Alien invasions, cosmic entities, timeline disruptions. But this is different. This time, the threat isn't just coming from outside, it's becoming part of me. Wednesday considered this with characteristic thoroughness before responding. Monsters exist in many forms. External threats can be fought with conventional weapons and strategies. Internal monstrosities require different approaches. She hesitated, uncharacteristic for her typically decisive nature. My family has a saying, we embrace our darkness so it cannot consume us. Perhaps your situation requires similar philosophy. The insight struck Ben with unexpected resonance. Throughout his hero career, he had utilized transformation as an external tool, becoming alien forms to fight threats, then returning to human normality afterward. The Noctrix's integration challenged that fundamental separation between human identity and transformed state. Control rather than rejection, he mused, studying the midnight blue veins beneath his skin. Working with the corruption instead of fighting against it. A potentially viable approach, Wednesday agreed, though not without significant risks. Before their conversation could continue further, Enid approached, her werewolf form beginning the reversion process as moonset progressed. The transformation back to human appeared less violent than usual, more controlled as her NTE-graded consciousness guided the physiological changes. Lunar influence diminishing, Wednesday observed, stepping back to give Enid space during her reversion. The psychic bridge appears to have facilitated improved transition mechanics. As Enid completed her transformation back to human form, exhaustion evident in her posture but consciousness fully intact, Ben fulfilled his earlier promise. Being present for her after the difficult night. He offered his jacket without comment, understanding the vulnerability of post-transformation recovery without drawing unnecessary attention to it. Thanks, Enid said simply, wrapping the jacket around herself. For everything. The words carried weight beyond their simplicity, acknowledging not just the borrowed clothing but the risks Ben had taken to help her regain control. That's what friends do, he replied with equal simplicity, though usually with fewer dimensional shadow monsters involved. Her smile was tired but genuine. Welcome to Nevermore. The dimensional shadow monsters are actually pretty standard for a Tuesday. Are technically Wednesday now, I guess. She glanced at their gothic classmate. No offense to present company. None taken. Wednesday responded with characteristic deadpan delivery. Chronological designations hold no personal significance despite nominal coincidence. The moment of lightness amid the complex circumstances provided necessary emotional balance, a reminder that even while navigating cosmic threats and dimensional contamination, human connection remained vital. Ben felt the Noctrix pulse against his wrist, its rhythm momentarily synchronizing not just with his heartbeat but with something larger, the connection between himself and these unlikely allies who had become essential to his survival. Whatever the Void Walkers intended with the convergence, whatever the Noctrix's complete integration might transform him into, he would face it not as an isolated hero but with unexpected companions who brought their own strengths to the unfolding dimensional drama. As dawn approached, casting first light across Nevermore Academy's Gothic architecture, Ben Tennyson contemplated the nature of monsters, those that emerged from dimensional shadows, those created through supernatural transformation, and those born from humanity's fear of the unknown. The boundaries between these categories seemed increasingly permeable, just as the boundaries between dimensions thinned during cosmic alignments. Perhaps the true challenge wasn't fighting monsters but understanding them, including the one he might be becoming. Chapter 3 End. The End. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.